You've been lied to about slowing down. They told you it's something you earn after the hustle, after success, after everything is finally in place. But if that were true, why does life still feel like a race you never agreed to run? Why does your chest stay tight even in silence? Why does your mind speed up the second you try to rest? Why do you still feel behind, no matter how much you do? The truth is, slowing down isn't a reward at the end. It's a choice you make right now. And Buddhist wisdom has known this for centuries. For thousands of years, monks and wanderers have followed a different rhythm, one that doesn't chase, doesn't rush, doesn't measure worth by how much you achieve. Instead, it invites you to move gently, breathe deeply, and be fully here, not by running away from life, but by stepping into it slowly. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will begin to shift. Your nervous system will loosen its grip. Your thoughts will lose their urgency. And you'll remember what your body has been whispering all along. You're allowed to slow down. This isn't just a sleep audio. It's a quiet rebellion against the world's pressure to go faster. It's a return to your natural rhythm. It's the beginning of peace, not out there, but in here. Are you ready to remember how to slow down? Let's begin. You're still here, listening. That means something inside you is ready, not just for rest, but for a different way of living, a quieter way, a kinder rhythm. Maybe you didn't know how much you needed it until now, but your body knows. Your breath knows. The part of you that's been craving stillness, that soft ache for something slower, deeper, it's finally being heard. And now we go further. Slowing down isn't just about silence or stillness. It's also about who you walk with, the people you let near, the ones you allow into the sacred space of your mind, your heart, your daily life. In the Buddhist path, this isn't a side note, it's essential. Spiritual friendship, or kalyana mittata, is one of the most powerful forces in the human experience. Not loud, not showy, but quietly life-altering. It can shape your pace, your presence, and your peace without you even realizing it. There's a calm that comes from being truly seen, not judged, not fixed, just seen. A kind of inner slowing that can only happen when you feel safe. And safety, real emotional safety, is created in conscious relationships. These are the people who don't push you to be more, do more, or prove yourself. They don't drain your energy, they restore it. When you're with someone like that, time feels different. There's no pressure to perform. You speak slower, you listen more deeply. Your nervous system breathes. It's not just about what's said, it's about the way it's held. Their presence invites your own presence. Their steadiness becomes a mirror for your own. That's what kalyana mittata is. It's not about having lots of friends. It's about the quality of connection. The Buddha himself said that spiritual friendship isn't half the holy life. It's the entire path. That tells you something. It means that if you're surrounded by noise, competition, comparison, shallow talk, or people who don't see your inner world, it's not just uncomfortable. It actually speeds you up. It pulls you out of your center. A spiritual friend holds space. They don't fill silence out of discomfort. They trust the pauses. They don't try to rescue you from your pain with quick advice or hollow positivity. Instead, they witness. They stay. They let your truth unfold at its own pace. That kind of company trains your nervous system to slow down because you're no longer defending yourself. It's hard to relax when you're bracing for judgment. That's why so many people never really rest, even when they're alone. Their relationships have trained them to be on edge, to explain, to filter, to shrink. But in the presence of someone who welcomes all of you, the anger, the doubt, the confusion, the rawness, your guard lowers, slowly. And in that lowering, something inside you loosens. You stop performing. You stop rushing to be okay. This doesn't mean every relationship has to be intense or serious. It means that the ones closest to your heart should be intentional, chosen, nourished, because they're shaping you, they're sculpting your inner speed. Without you noticing, the energy of your relationships becomes your own. If the people around you are frantic, you absorb that. If they are shallow, you mirror that. If they are kind, you soften. If they are spacious, you breathe. It's easy to underestimate how much this matters. In a fast world, fast relationships are the norm. Quick replies, half listening, surface-level updates. That kind of interaction keeps your mind in motion. It keeps you scanning for cues, trying to be interesting, trying to be liked. You never fully arrive. But a true spiritual friend brings you back to yourself, not by saying, slow down, but by living slowly, by modeling presence, by choosing their words with care, by listening in a way that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. That energy is medicine. It trains your body to trust that not everything has to be urgent, that not everything has to be explained, that silence doesn't mean something's wrong. Over time, you begin to carry that same energy into your own life, not just with others, but with yourself. You stop rushing through your emotions. You stop demanding clarity from every thought. You give yourself space to feel things without analyzing them. And that's when slowing down stops being something you try to do and starts being the way you are. In conscious relationships, listening becomes a sacred act, not just hearing words, but absorbing their weight, pausing before responding, letting emotions breathe. So many of us are used to talking just to fill space or listening just to reply, but that keeps us stuck in a loop of mental speed. Real listening breaks that cycle. When someone listens to you with presence, without interruption or agenda, your mind naturally quiets. You stop rehearsing your next sentence. You stop defending your story. You start feeling safe enough to reflect, to explore, even to pause mid-thought and sit in silence. That's not a small thing. That's the nervous system learning a new language, and it goes both ways. Being the one who listens deeply also slows you down. It shifts your attention from your own thoughts to the unfolding moment. It requires patience. It invites stillness. Over time, this becomes a practice, not just in conversation, but in life. You begin to meet everything with more openness, less urgency. Spiritual friends also act as mirrors, not the kind that reflects your image, but the kind that reflects your essence. They remind you who you really are when you've forgotten, not through flattery, but through presence, through the way they hold your truth gently, through the way they speak with honesty and compassion, even when it's hard. That kind of mirroring isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it shows you the places where you've sped up to escape yourself. But it's never harsh. It doesn't shame you. It invites you to slow down, to come back, to be with what is. There's a sacred quality in these relationships, a rhythm, a pacing, a kind of trust that doesn't need to be rushed. It's not just about support. It's about how the support is offered, without fixing, without trying to shape your experience, with a deep respect for your own inner timing. This is rare, but it's possible, and it's worth cultivating. The truth is, many people are lonely, not because they're alone, but because they're not truly met. Their conversations skim the surface. Their presence is always split. Their friendships are functional, not soulful. And that makes it hard to slow down, because when you're not seen, you're always chasing something. Spiritual friendship offers the opposite, a home, a space where you can exhale, a relationship that doesn't ask you to be different, that doesn't measure your worth by your productivity, that allows you to simply be, and in that being, the rush begins to dissolve. This isn't about dependence, it's about resonance. Being around someone whose nervous system is at peace helps your own system learn how to rest. Not by trying, but by feeling. By being near that energy long enough that it becomes familiar. Over time, you become that for others too. Your presence becomes calming. Your words slow down. Your attention becomes spacious. Not because you're performing calm, but because you are calm. The kind of calm that comes from being deeply connected, both to others and to yourself. The pace of your relationships becomes the pace of your mind. That's why this teaching matters. Because it shows us that slowing down isn't just about technique, it's about connection. Real connection. Relationships grounded in spiritual friendship don't create pressure. They create space. They don't demand perfection. They allow for process. They remind us that we don't have to do everything alone, but we also don't need to rely on chaos to feel alive. There's a steadiness that builds over time when you are held in conscious company, a rhythm, a pulse, a slower way of being that becomes your default, not your escape. The more you live inside these kinds of connections, the less attractive speed becomes. The less interested you are in the chase. You begin to see that much of what you thought was necessary was really just noise. That the right company doesn't push you to be faster. It reminds you how to be present, how to be soft, how to be here. This is the path of Kalyana Mittata, a path walked not alone, but side by side. Each person holding a lantern, not for themselves, but for the one next to them. And in that light, you remember what it feels like to not hurry, to not strive, to not perform. You remember what it feels like to simply walk, slowly, gently, with someone who sees your soul and says, "You don't have to rush." And in that moment, something deep inside you exhales. That exhale is the beginning of your return to your center, to your natural pace, to the quiet joy of being met, not with noise, not with advice, but with presence. A presence that says, "You're safe here. You can slow down now." And just like that, the world softens. Because your relationships have finally aligned with the rhythm your soul has been craving all along. This is how you slow down, together. And so the heart begins to slow, not just because it feels safe with another, but because it has learned how to stay with itself, to pause, to settle, to rest, not just in solitude, but in truth. Because once you've been seen fully by another, something inside starts craving a deeper vision still, not of relationships this time, but of reality itself. The way things really are, beneath the stories, beneath the filters, beneath the endless inner commentary. This is where the real shift begins. A deeper stillness, a different kind of slowing down, one that doesn't rely on comfort, but clarity. That clarity has a name in Buddhist practice, Yathabhutanyana Dasana, the direct knowing and seeing of things just as they are. not as we want them to be, not as we fear they are, but as they truly are, beneath assumptions, beneath expectations, beneath all the mental noise that speeds us up without mercy. This way of seeing doesn't arrive through more thinking. It arrives through presence, through observing without grasping, through letting things be exactly what they are without dressing them up or tearing them down. It's the kind of vision that softens anxiety at its root, because anxiety feeds on illusion, on false stories about time, self, and control. The mind races when it's trying to predict or protect, but when it sees clearly, it stops needing to outrun life. It simply meets it. Clarity slows us down because it pulls us out of the fight. It ends the struggle with what should be and invites us into what is. That's where the rush loses its power, not because you've numbed yourself, but because you're no longer negotiating with reality. This practice begins in small ways, by noticing the impermanence of a single breath, by observing how a thought arises, lingers, and fades, without you doing anything to push or pull. It deepens through watching how moments shift, how emotions dissolve, how identities unravel when you stop holding them so tightly. There's a calm that comes from seeing change directly, not as a concept, but as a constant. Noticing how everything, sounds, moods, sensations, arises and passes away over and over again. This isn't philosophical, it's practical. Because when you really see how nothing stays, you stop trying to hold on so tightly. You stop rushing to secure what cannot be kept. Urgency often comes from fear. A fear that if we don't act fast enough, feel strong enough, achieve high enough, we'll lose our worth. But when you see that nothing stays, not pleasure, not pain, not praise, not criticism, there's less pressure to grip, to prove, to chase. You begin to meet each moment as a visitor, not a possession. This kind of insight doesn't flatten experience, it sharpens it. You feel more, not less. But the feelings no longer control you. You see them arise like waves, knowing they will pass. This perspective doesn't make you detached, it makes you tender. Because you see the fragility in everything, and with that vision comes a natural gentleness. People think slowing down is about escape, but this path isn't about retreating from life. It's about seeing it clearly enough that you no longer have to fight it. The compulsion to rush often hides a resistance to grief, to letting go, to the truth that life cannot be pinned down. When you stop resisting that, your body softens. Your mind no longer spins trying to control the uncontrollable. Mindfulness of impermanence isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about learning to care differently, with presence instead of possession, with reverence instead of fear. That shift changes everything. Suddenly, you're no longer rushing through a moment to get to the next. You're fully in it, knowing it will never come again. That's where meaning lives, not in how long something lasts, but in how completely you meet it while it's here. This clarity also untangles suffering, not by erasing pain, but by dissolving the illusions that make it heavier. When you see that thoughts are just thoughts, not truths, that emotions are weather, not identity, that experiences are not who you are, but what you move through, a spaciousness opens, not emptiness, but freedom. From this place, your decisions slow down too. You stop reacting from habit and start responding from awareness. You're no longer driven by the urgency to fix, please, or escape. You listen longer. You wait before moving. You let things unfold without needing to push. That patience doesn't come from discipline. It comes from understanding, from seeing that the moment is already enough, that rushing won't bring you peace, and pausing won't take anything away. It simply reveals what's been here all along. This insight also reveals the layers of clinging that make life feel tight, not just to things, but to ideas, who we think we should be, what life should look like, what success or healing or happiness must include. When you see those attachments clearly, without judgment, they begin to soften. You stop forcing yourself to meet impossible ideals. You start living from where you actually are. And you learn that this moment, exactly as it is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. That shift alone can quiet 1,000 rushing thoughts. Seeing clearly also changes how we relate to others. You stop expecting them to stay the same. You let go of the pressure for them to behave how you want. You understand that people, like everything else, are changing moment by moment. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you compassionate. You stop clinging to roles and begin meeting others in their present state, not through your filtered memory of who they were. This opens the door to deeper connection, because when you're no longer fighting reality, you can actually be present for it. You're no longer having a conversation with your expectations. You're having a conversation with them. That realness creates warmth. It slows the pace of relating, turning dialogue into presence, silence into intimacy. In Buddhist teachings, this clear seeing is not limited to spiritual retreats or meditation cushions. It's meant for everyday life. Washing dishes, feeling irritation, hearing a bird call, watching your breath in traffic. Each moment is a doorway, not to something exotic, but to something true. And the more you step through, the more natural slowness becomes. You begin to live as if each moment is enough. Not because you've convinced yourself of that, but because you've seen that it's all you ever really have. There's no later, no final arrival, no future version of yourself who finally figures it all out. There's only now, and the more fully you see it, the more precious it becomes. Clarity brings reverence, not as an idea, but as a direct experience. The way a shadow moves across your wall, the feeling of cool air on your neck, the weight of your body against the bed right now. These things are not background noise, they're life. And when you see them fully, the desire to rush slips away, because what you were chasing is already here. The mind doesn't need to be silent to be still. It needs to see through the noise, through the fear, through the illusions that say something is missing. Yathabhutanyana dasana isn't perfection, it's perception. It's what happens when you stop believing the commentary and start seeing the moment. Over time, this insight becomes your anchor. Not a rigid belief, but a living awareness. You don't have to remind yourself to slow down anymore. You just don't want to rush. Because why would you hurry through something this rich, this fleeting, this real? Even the difficult moments shift under this light. Pain still hurts, but it no longer defines you. You feel it move through, not take over. You meet discomfort with curiosity instead of panic. You stop being afraid of feeling because you've learned that nothing stays, not even the heaviness. There's power in that. The power to stay, to witness, to soften instead of scramble. The kind of power that doesn't look like control, but like surrender. Not giving up, but letting go of what was never yours to hold so tightly in the first place. And so, through this seeing, life begins to flow again. Not because it changed, but because you did. Because you're no longer trapped inside the illusion of control, no longer clinging to permanence in a world that keeps breathing, moving, shifting, moment by moment. You're walking differently now, not slower in step, but slower in spirit, rooted, clear, present. And that clarity is worth everything, because it gives you back what the rush had stolen, the ability to feel your life fully, gently, as it is. And that, right there, is the stillness you were searching for all along. And so, clarity becomes your ground. You begin to walk through life with less urgency, not because everything is perfect, but because you finally see that it doesn't have to be. The pressure to escape fades. The need to fix softens. And in its place, a quiet confidence begins to grow. The kind that comes not from control, but from seeing clearly. Seeing how everything rises, shifts, dissolves. How even your thoughts are not permanent residents, but passing guests. That alone changes everything. But there's a deeper stillness still waiting, not in the thoughts themselves, but in the spaces they leave behind. We rarely notice these spaces. Most people live in constant mental motion, thoughts stacked on top of each other, no breath between them. And yet, if you slow down enough, if you learn how to listen, you'll discover something extraordinary. Between one thought and the next, there's a pause, a gap, a tiny silence that often goes unnoticed. And in that silence, something timeless waits, something more peaceful than any thought could offer. This isn't something you create, it's something you uncover. The Buddha didn't teach only through concepts, he taught through silence, through presence, through the space between actions. In this stillness, there is no trying, no chasing, no identity to defend. There is only being. The absence of doing becomes its own kind of wisdom, a knowing that is not about content, but about awareness itself. Recognizing these gaps is not a mental trick. It's a shift in perception. You're not forcing the mind to be quiet. You're simply noticing when it already is. This noticing changes your relationship with thinking altogether. You begin to realize that thoughts are not constant. They arise, they linger, and they fade. And what's in between is not empty, but alive. Most of us believe we are our thoughts, that who we are is what we think. But when you notice the pauses, you begin to see that who you are is actually what sees the thought. The awareness behind it, the space that holds it without getting lost in it. That space is your natural state, but it gets buried under tasks, under worry, under endless inner narration. Observing the gap is a way to return, not to an idea, but to a felt sense of peace that needs no words. This isn't about stopping thought. Thoughts will come. That's their nature. But by learning to rest in the spaces between them, you're no longer pulled by their momentum. You become the observer, not the reactor. There's a softness here, a kind of still rest that doesn't need explanation. No judgment, no effort, just being. That being is what the Buddha pointed to when he spoke of non-doing. It doesn't mean laziness or avoidance. It means the mind no longer clings, no longer interferes. It means allowing what is to simply be. This is not easy in a world that teaches us to fill every silence. that praises constant stimulation. But the deepest truths are not spoken. They are felt in the spaces where nothing is said, in the quiet after a breath, in the pause between thoughts, in the still moment when you stop chasing the next moment. As your awareness sharpens, you'll begin to notice this gap more often. At first, maybe just for a second, then longer. In meditation, these spaces can open naturally. You sit, you breathe, you watch the thoughts rise, and then suddenly there's nothing, just presence, not asleep, not distracted, just here. And that here is more restful than sleep, because it holds no story, no identity, just awareness, clear and open. The more you learn to recognize this, the more your nervous system begins to trust it. That trust is vital. Without it, you'll always return to thinking as a form of control. But when you feel the safety of stillness, you no longer reach for thoughts like a life raft. You rest in what is. In daily life, these pauses are available too. In a conversation, the silence before you speak. In walking, the moment between steps. In work, the breath between tasks. You begin to move differently, not slower out of effort, but naturally. Because your attention is resting in what's real, not in what's next. Non-doing doesn't mean you stop living. It means you stop fighting your life. You do what needs to be done, but without being consumed by it. The action flows from stillness, not tension. It becomes more effective, more intuitive, less noise, more precision. Even in difficulty, the gap is there. When fear arises, there's a moment before reaction. That moment is freedom. In that space, you can choose. You don't have to follow the old pattern. You don't have to rush. You can just stay, feel, watch. And sometimes, in that pause, the fear softens. Not because you pushed it away, but because you gave it space to move. Emotions, too, are not permanent. They pass through when you let them. The pause between their rise and fall is where understanding lives. This awareness begins to reshape your whole life. It turns ordinary moments into sacred ones, not because of what's happening, but because of how present you are for them. The cup in your hands, the quiet of morning, the sound of your breath in the dark, all of it held in the pause. This kind of presence doesn't require a special place or perfect conditions. It requires only willingness, a willingness to stay, to witness, to not rush away. The mind will want to fill the silence. That's okay. Let it come. Watch it pass. Then come back to the space, to the pause, to the awareness that never leaves, no matter what the thoughts are doing. Over time, this becomes a practice not of effort, but of returning, over and over again. Back to the pause, back to the breath, back to the quiet you forgot was always with you. And with that return comes a shift, not in what you do, but in how you are. You begin to live from the inside out, not driven by external noise, but guided by internal stillness. This changes your conversations. You speak more slowly, you listen more fully. You wait longer before reacting. You begin to sense what needs to be said and what doesn't. You notice the energy behind your actions. You become more aware of intention, not just behavior. What used to be automatic becomes conscious. The gap gives you time to choose, and choice gives you freedom. Even the body responds. Muscles soften, the breath deepens, the heart slows, not because you forced calm, but because you allowed space. That allowance is powerful. It breaks the cycle of grasping. It invites life to flow. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to stay with it. Stay with the silence long enough to see that it's not empty. It's full of presence, full of clarity, full of wisdom that thinking can't reach. There is peace in not knowing. There is stillness in not doing. There is truth in simply being. The pauses between thoughts are not interruptions. They are the doorway to awareness, to freedom, to yourself. And through that door, life becomes quiet. Not because the world changed, but because you're finally hearing what's underneath the noise. This is the silence the Buddha pointed to. Not a silence of absence, but of depth. Not a silence of emptiness, but of wholeness. And once you've felt it, even for a breath, you'll never forget it. Because it's who you were before thought. It's what you return to when thought is gone. It's the stillness that was always waiting, right here in the pause. So the pause becomes the teacher, a doorway not to detachment, but to intimacy. As you rest in those quiet spaces between thoughts, something shifts. You start listening differently, to others, to your body, to the world itself. Life stops being a blur. It slows, it deepens. And in that deepening, a question begins to rise quietly from within. If stillness feels this honest, then why do we live in such a hurry? Why do we treat speed as a virtue, busyness as proof of value, productivity as the highest form of goodness? There's a tension here that you start to notice more clearly. The world moves fast. It demands outcomes, rewards speed, praises efficiency, and yet everything in you, your body, your breath, your nervous system, knows that this speed doesn't bring peace. It brings exhaustion, disconnection, a loss of something essential. This is where the Buddhist path offers something radical, the idea that slowing down isn't just personal healing, it's an ethical act, a form of resistance, a refusal to participate in a system that glorifies burnout, constant output, and endless striving. Not from anger, not from judgment, but from clarity. In Buddhism, this principle is rooted in sila, ethical conduct. At first glance, ethics might seem unrelated to pace, but look deeper, and you begin to see that the way we live, how we act, how we speak, how we choose to engage with the world, is inseparable from how fast we move. When you're rushing, you're less likely to listen fully, less likely to reflect, more likely to react, to cut corners, to chase approval or results at the expense of your inner integrity. Ethics in Buddhist teachings are not a list of rules to follow for moral superiority. They are a path to alignment, a way of living that supports awareness, compassion, and presence. Noticing when you're speaking carelessly because you're in a rush. Noticing when you're taking more than you need because you're afraid of falling behind. Noticing how speed creates its own kind of violence toward yourself, toward others, and toward the earth. To live ethically in a world obsessed with performance means to move differently, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It means choosing intention over impulse, depth over speed, connection over competition. This choice isn't loud. It often goes unseen, but it is powerful. Think of generosity, not just giving money, but giving time, attention, patience. These acts require slowness. You can't be generous while rushing. To be truly present with someone in their pain, their joy, their silence, you must slow down enough to meet them where they are. That's ethical presence. And in today's world, it's rare. Think of honesty, not just factual truth, but the kind of honesty that comes from self-awareness, that doesn't perform or manipulate, that doesn't rush to fill silence with polished answers. To speak truthfully, you have to know what you really feel, and that requires space, time, a slowing down to feel what's beneath the surface. Compassion, too, is inseparable from pace. You can't be kind in a hurry. You can be nice, maybe, polite, but true compassion, the kind that sees suffering and chooses to stay with it, that only grows in stillness. When you're moving too fast, you miss the subtle cues. You overlook pain. You become numb to what others carry. Even non-harming begins with slowness. When you move too quickly, you step on things without noticing. You speak sharp words out of stress. You react to fear before understanding. Slowness creates the space to see clearly, to act with care, to prevent harm before it happens. Ethical living asks us to stop rushing past our own hearts, to stop treating others as means to an end, to stop consuming experiences as if they're checkboxes on a productivity list. It asks for a shift in rhythm, not as punishment, but as liberation. This liberation is not abstract. It shows up in daily life, choosing to eat with awareness rather than multitasking through meals, choosing to pause before answering someone, especially when emotions run high, choosing to rest when you're tired, not because you've earned it, but because you're a living being worthy of care. The culture may not reward these choices, but the Dharma does, because these small acts of integrity begin to align your inner world. You stop splitting yourself between who you are and who the world demands you to be, and that alignment brings a peace that can't be faked or forced. Ethical resistance doesn't mean withdrawing from the world. It means showing up with clarity and refusing to contribute to the patterns that cause suffering. It means looking honestly at your relationship with speed and asking, is this helping me live well, or is it just making me feel worthy for a moment? So many modern struggles come from this quiet war between your pace and your values, wanting to live kindly but feeling pressured to perform, wanting to be mindful but running on a schedule that leaves no room to breathe. The answer isn't more willpower, it's a realignment, a conscious choice to center your ethics, not your output. When you live from sila, you begin to see your energy as sacred. You stop pouring it into tasks that violate your peace. You learn to say no, not as rejection, but as reverence, for your own life, your own boundaries. You begin to choose people, projects, conversations that nourish your spirit, not just your reputation. And yes, it might look strange to others. Slowness often does. In a world chasing urgency, stillness can feel like rebellion, but it's a rebellion rooted in care, in sanity, in the wisdom that knows speed does not equal meaning. There's nothing ethical about constantly being available, about never resting, about numbing yourself with productivity until there's no room left to feel. And yet, this is what so many are conditioned to believe is good, responsible, admirable. True ethics challenge that conditioning, not with blame, but with presence. Presence that chooses silence when the world demands noise, that chooses careful listening over clever replies, that values people over progress, that honors time not as a commodity, but as a gift. This way of being isn't passive. It's active, precise, grounded. It asks you to examine your habits. How often do you rush your words to avoid discomfort? How often do you agree to things you don't believe in because you're afraid of falling behind? How often do you say yes out of fear rather than love? These questions aren't meant to shame. They're meant to wake something up. A remembering that you are not here to perform your value. You're here to live it. And that begins with rhythm. Slowing down is not about doing less. It's about doing differently. Doing with care, with intention, with awareness of impact. It's about pausing long enough to ask, is this aligned with the kind of world I want to help build? When you act from that place, your life becomes a quiet protest against exploitation, against disconnection, against the internalized belief that you must prove your worth through exhaustion. Instead, you become a vessel for something softer, more honest, more rooted. You begin to trust that you don't have to force goodness. It flows naturally when your actions reflect your values. And from this place, slowness is no longer something to apologize for. It becomes your teacher, your compass, your offering. Every slow breath becomes an act of defiance against a system that treats humans like machines. Every deliberate word becomes a seed of clarity. Every moment of presence becomes a thread of peace woven into a culture unraveling from speed. This is not just about personal healing, it's about collective sanity. Because when one person slows down, it gives others permission to do the same. Your pace becomes an invitation, a mirror, a reminder that another way is possible. You may not see the ripple right away, but it happens. In the way someone feels seen after you listen without interrupting. In the way a child relaxes when you're not rushing them. In the way your body begins to trust that it no longer has to push through everything. These small ripples are how change begins, not through force, but through presence, through slowness lived as truth. This is the heart of Sila, not moral perfection, not rigid rules, but a way of living that returns you to balance, that asks gently how you want to show up in this world, not just once, but again and again. And as you ask that question more often, your life begins to align. The tension starts to ease. The rush loses its grip. Not because the world slowed down, but because you did. And that changes everything. When the world stops spinning in your head and you begin to live in a pace that matches your truth, something shifts beneath the surface. Your thoughts become clearer. Your choices feel lighter. Life, for once, fits. This kind of ethical rhythm opens a space inside you where presence becomes the default, not the exception. But presence isn't only found in stillness. It's also found in movement. When that movement is intentional, aware, and free from the pressure to be anywhere but here. Walking meditation is not just a practice. It's a profound return. A way to break free from the invisible weight of time constantly pressing against your shoulders. Not the kind of time marked by clocks and schedules, but the inner time that ticks with tension, the feeling that you should already be somewhere else, be someone else, be further along. Most people walk to get somewhere. They move fast, heads forward, minds already 3 steps ahead. The body becomes a machine for transport, the mind a passenger lost in memory or anxiety. But walking meditation invites something else entirely. It invites you to inhabit your steps, to stop treating walking as a means to an end and start treating it as the practice itself, as life itself. Each step becomes a homecoming, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You feel the ground under your feet. You sense the rhythm of your body. You hear the sound of your breath. You enter the only moment that has ever been real, this one. Not the next one, not the last one, just this one. Time shifts when you walk this way. It no longer feels like a straight line pulling you forward. It starts to feel like a circle, or even like stillness itself. Because when you are truly present in each step, time dissolves. The pressure to move faster disappears. What remains is experience, pure, immediate, unfiltered. This is not philosophical, it is practical. When you walk without rushing, your mind quiets, your breath deepens, your awareness sharpens. You start to notice the things you usually miss, the way the air feels on your skin, the movement of trees, the subtle shift in your balance as you change direction. These are not distractions, they are the doorway. The practice is simple. You walk slowly, not artificially, not to look spiritual or strange, but slow enough to feel, to know you are walking. You let your arms move naturally. You place your attention on the contact between your foot and the ground. You notice the shift of weight, the rolling motion, the soft push forward. Each detail becomes a point of return. When thoughts arise, which they will, you don't resist them, but you also don't follow them. You return, gently, without force, to the movement of your feet. Over and over, your attention drops from the head into the body, from future or past into now. Each return is a small act of liberation. This changes your relationship with time. No longer something to fight against or chase after. Time becomes space. Space to breathe, space to notice, space to rest while in motion. You begin to see how much of your tension was created by the mental habit of rushing, even when there was no reason to rush. In walking meditation, there is nowhere to get to. This confuses the mind at first. It wants a destination, a goal. But when you stay with the practice, something else takes over. A kind of timeless awareness that doesn't measure worth by speed. A presence that values experience over result. This is not just calming, it is transformational. It teaches your entire system to relate to movement differently, no longer as a task to be completed, but as a moment to be lived. This shift begins to affect everything. You eat more slowly, you listen more deeply. You start to resist the impulse to multitask because you see what it costs you. Walking this way also reveals your habitual patterns. How often you lean forward, trying to get to the next thing. How often you brace your body for imagined threats. How often your mind pulls you away from your direct experience. These habits can only be changed by awareness, not by force. Walking meditation offers that awareness, not as judgment, but as clarity. There is something deeply healing about returning to the ground. So many people live in their heads. They forget they have feet. They forget the earth is always beneath them. When you walk with presence, you reconnect with that support, with that quiet, constant companionship of the ground. It holds you, step after step, without needing anything in return. This connection is more than physical. It's emotional, psychological, existential. When you walk mindfully, you begin to feel your belonging, not in some abstract sense, but right here, in the simple contact between skin and soil. You are not separate. You are part of something steady, vast, and alive. Over time, walking meditation also builds resilience, not by teaching you how to push harder, but by showing you how to stay, with discomfort, with restlessness, with the rawness of being human. You stop needing to move faster to escape what you feel. You learn to be with it, to walk with it, to carry it gently, step by step. This kind of presence builds a different kind of strength, a groundedness that isn't shaken by minor stresses, a calm that doesn't depend on circumstances, a rhythm that allows you to live without hurrying your life away. In the Buddha's time, monks and nuns spent much of their day walking, not because they had no transportation, but because walking was part of their practice, a way to embody the teachings, to stay close to the earth, to meet each moment with attention. This is still true today. Whether you live in a forest or a city, walking can become your path, not a separate activity, but part of your daily rhythm. A walking meeting, a walk between appointments, a mindful trip to the store. Every step becomes an opportunity to return. Return to what? To the only moment you will ever truly live in. This one, the moment your foot touches the ground, the moment your breath enters your body, the moment your mind softens its grip. This kind of walking asks nothing of you but presence. No spiritual pose, no mystical insight, no special outcome. Just you, your body, your breath, your awareness. Together, in motion, not trying to get anywhere else. The more you practice, the more you begin to see how often you've treated life as a waiting room, always trying to get through one thing to get to the next, never arriving, never resting. Walking meditation shatters that illusion. It reveals that you were already here, that you've always been here. You just didn't know how to stay. This realization brings not just peace, but freedom. Freedom from the story that you must hurry to be worthy. Freedom from the pressure to always be more, do more, become more. When you walk with awareness, you see that you are already enough. Not later, now. Even the structure of your day begins to shift. Time expands, not because the clock changes, but because your relationship to it does. A 10-minute walk feels full, whole, complete. You stop measuring time in tasks and start experiencing it in presence. This shift also affects how you relate to others. You stop interrupting. You let people finish their sentences. You pause before answering. You listen not just to the words, but to the space between them. Just like in walking meditation, you begin to honor the silence as much as the movement. This kind of presence is contagious. People feel it. They soften around you. They slow down. Your pace gives others permission to come back to themselves. Without words, you create space. Walking meditation also reminds you that healing doesn't always happen in stillness. It can happen in motion, in rhythm, in the quiet repetition of one step after another. So much of what hurts comes from disconnection, from our bodies, from nature, from time itself. Each step taken with awareness heals a little bit of that distance. And the best part? You can begin now, wherever you are. You don't need special conditions. You don't need a retreat. You don't even need silence. All you need is the willingness to return, to bring your attention to your step and then to the next. With time, this becomes your default rhythm. Not slow for the sake of slowness, but honest, aligned, present. You begin to move through life like someone who knows they are home. Not in a place, but in a presence. And in that presence, time finally loses its grip. Not because it stops, but because you stop being trapped by it. You're no longer chasing, you're walking. One step, one breath, one sacred moment at a time. So you learn to walk again, not just through space, but through time. And not the kind of time that keeps you checking clocks, but the kind that unfolds in the quiet rhythm of your steps. You begin to understand that the world does not rush you. It's the inner noise that does. The noise quiets each time you pause, each time you return to the ground, each time you remember that presence needs no destination. And as the steps continue, another question starts to grow quietly inside you. If time no longer demands urgency, then what else have we been taught to value only for what it can do instead of what it is? This leads to something tender, a deeper inquiry, something that goes beyond motion, beyond time, even beyond doing. A realization that much of what is most beautiful in life has no utility. It serves no task, it accomplishes nothing, and yet it holds immeasurable meaning. In Buddhist teachings, the Buddha once pointed to a pile of leaves, saying that what he had taught was like a handful, while what he knew was like all the leaves in the forest. From this metaphor, many see the simplicity of his message. But look again. There's something more hidden there, a deeper lesson about the value of what seems unnecessary. Because in that forest, not every leaf is useful. Some nourish, some decay, some just are, and yet they are part of the whole. We live in a world that assigns value based on function. You are useful if you produce, if you solve, if you give a return. The moment something appears non-functional, it is dismissed, overlooked, forgotten. But the Dharma speaks to a different truth, a truth that whispers softly. What is most human, most sacred, is often what can't be measured at all. Slowing down invites you to rediscover this truth. When you stop moving at the speed of tasks, you begin to see the parts of life you usually ignore. The cracks in the pavement, the stillness of a rainy afternoon, the part of your mind that doesn't try to explain, just observes. These are not outcomes, they are not tools, they are the useless leaves of your life, and they hold everything. Function tells us to skip what doesn't lead to a result. Presence tells us to stay even when nothing is happening. That staying becomes a revolution. Because in it, you begin to reclaim your ability to value something without needing to justify it. This touches everything: how you speak, how you listen, how you spend your time. You begin to find worth in the things you once ignored. Watching a candle burn, listening to music without multitasking, sitting with a friend and saying nothing at all. To the productivity mind, these moments are a waste, but to a quiet heart, they are nourishment. They return you to the truth that not everything sacred must be earned. Some things are given, some things are here simply to be experienced, not used. This includes parts of yourself. We are taught to measure our days in achievements, to measure our worth in how much we can offer, and so, slowly, without realizing it, we begin to hide the parts of ourselves that don't fit. The daydreamer, the sensitive one, the quiet wonder that doesn't build anything but beauty. But the Dharma sees no such division. It makes room for the whole, the silence and the speaking, the usefulness and the stillness, the leaf that feeds and the leaf that simply falls. This view allows you to stop treating yourself like a project. It allows you to rest, not because you finished everything, but because even your resting self has worth. This understanding dissolves the internal war, the push to always be more, the shame of being tired, the guilt of doing nothing. Because you begin to see that doing nothing is often the deepest form of healing. When you stop asking every moment to serve a goal, the moment becomes enough. That shift brings your body out of fight, your breath out of holding, your mind out of scarcity. And what takes its place is intimacy, a real relationship with life, not as something to manage, but something to meet, fully, with all of yourself, not just the productive parts. This also shifts how you relate to others. In a world that celebrates only the loudest, the fastest, the most efficient, you begin to cherish what's quiet, what's slow, what doesn't seek attention. A child's laugh, a grandmother's silence, the presence of someone who sits beside you without filling the air. You no longer need people to perform their worth, and so you stop performing yours. This opens the space for real connection, where nothing needs to be proven and everything is welcome. The leaf becomes a teacher. It reminds you that life is not a checklist, that even what falls away has value, that not everything you feel has to make sense, that softness is not failure, that stillness is not emptiness. This changes your idea of contribution. You start to trust that your presence matters even when you're not fixing anything. You start to believe that you are enough, even on days when all you did was be here. And that belief is not weakness, it is wisdom. The kind of wisdom that doesn't fight to be seen, but offers itself quietly, like a fallen leaf on a forest floor. Unused, unneeded, whole. It's tempting to try and earn stillness, to prove we deserve to rest, to fill even our spiritual practice with effort and expectation. But this too can become a trap. A gentler path says, let some things be for their own sake. A walk not for steps, but for walking. A breath not to calm you down, but to feel what breath feels like. A conversation not to solve anything, but to share space. This is where slowing down becomes more than recovery. It becomes revelation, because you begin to see what was always there, waiting to be noticed, and you realize it never needed to be more. Meaning doesn't arrive only through purpose, it also arrives through presence. And some of the most meaningful things have no obvious purpose at all. They remind us that we are not machines, that our value is not tied to what we produce, that our being, raw, quiet, unpolished, is enough. You carry this with you as you move through your days. You speak a little softer, you sit a little longer. You notice the beauty of things that serve no role, like laughter that fades, like tears that have no explanation, like the spaces between words, the pauses in conversation, the parts of life we used to call empty, but which are, in truth, the most alive. This seeing grows slowly. It doesn't arrive all at once. But each time you choose to value the useless, a part of you heals, a part of you returns, a part of you says, I don't need to do anything to be enough. And from that place, you live differently, not passively, but with reverence, not detached, but engaged in a new way, a way that sees worth not just in outcomes, but in existence. This is not about neglecting your responsibilities. It's about refusing to reduce your life to them. It's about honoring the unseen, the uncounted, the unnoticed moments that make a life rich. And it's about slowing down, not because you must, but because something in you wants to. Because it knows that what really matters cannot be rushed. So you keep walking, not to get anywhere, but to stay close to yourself, to this moment, to the leaf that falls with no reason but grace. And in that closeness, something opens, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to remind you you were never meant to be useful all the time. You were meant to be here, alive, whole, enough. And in that truth, time slows, breath softens, and life becomes clear again. So the pace of life begins to shift. You no longer feel the need to fill every silence, fix every thought, or justify every moment with purpose. You start to notice how much of your exhaustion came not from what you were doing, but from how tightly you were holding everything. The tension of being useful, the pressure of being fast, the weight of always being on the way to somewhere else. As you learn to let those pieces fall away, what remains is simpler. You begin to rest in things just as they are, and for the first time, you stop asking life to prove itself. But even in this slowing, there's a deeper question waiting, one that doesn't just shift your rhythm, but your view entirely. What happens when you step even further back? There is a kind of freedom that only comes from perspective. When you take a step back from your to-do list, you feel some ease. When you take a step back from your emotions, you see with more clarity. But the Buddha offered a view so vast, so humbling, that it doesn't just relieve stress, it dissolves urgency at its root. That view is cosmological. In Buddhist cosmology, time is not a straight line from birth to death. It is vast beyond comprehension. It is cyclical, expansive, and deeply impersonal. This is not meant to confuse. It is meant to liberate. Because when you begin to understand your life within the scale of what the Buddha called kalpas, immeasurable spans of time, you begin to loosen your grip on the illusion that everything must happen now. A single kalpa is said to be so long that traditional metaphors fail to capture it. One common teaching compares it to brushing a mountain with a silk cloth once every 100 years. By the time the mountain is worn away, that is still not a full kalpa. Within this scale, lifetimes rise and fall like morning mist. Civilizations appear and vanish. Suns are born and burn out. And yet here we are, so often trapped in panic because we think we're late, because we think our healing should have already happened, because we think there's not enough time to become who we're meant to be. But the truth is, time is not running out. It is unfolding. This doesn't make your life meaningless. It makes it sacred. Because in the face of such scale, what matters is not how fast you move, but how clearly you live. Whether you meet this moment with grasping or with grace. Whether you use your brief window not to chase every goal, but to deepen in wisdom. Zooming out doesn't mean detaching, it means seeing more fully. When you hold the awareness of cosmic time, you start to let go of the personal stories that once felt so heavy. That fight you had last week. That thing you haven't achieved yet. That comparison that still stings. They shrink, not because they're trivial, but because you're no longer measuring your life in hours and results. You're measuring it in awareness. Buddhist cosmology also reminds us that we've done this before, over and over again, not as punishment or reward, but as part of the endless unfolding of existence. Birth, death, rebirth, not just once, again and again, through countless forms, countless moments. This removes the panic from not getting it all right in one life. It gives you room to grow slowly, with compassion. There's a wisdom that comes from knowing this is not your only chance. You begin to value your intentions more than your accomplishments. You begin to care less about winning and more about waking up. This view also dissolves the illusion of isolation. You are not the center of the story. You are not the hero. You are not the failure. You are part of a pattern that extends beyond lifetimes, beyond species, beyond planets. This is not about erasing your importance. It's about erasing the fear that you're alone. Even suffering looks different within this frame. Not as something to get rid of quickly, but as part of the larger fabric of transformation. Pain isn't the enemy. It's the condition through which compassion becomes possible, through which clarity is refined. When urgency drops, presence arises. You begin to walk slower, not because you're lazy, but because you understand there's no final destination. You begin to listen more deeply, not because you're unsure, but because you no longer need to be first. You begin to rest without guilt, not because you gave up, but because you remembered that there is time. The pressure to define yourself begins to dissolve. In a world that moves fast, people rush to build identity, to become someone, to prove value. But when you look through the lens of cosmic time, identity becomes porous. It shifts. What you are is not a fixed role, but a presence moving through changing conditions. This doesn't strip you of meaning. It gives you room to hold your life lightly, to treat experience as something to be met, not mastered. You no longer see yourself as behind or broken. You see yourself as unfolding, and the way you relate to others changes too. You stop projecting urgency onto them. You stop rushing their process. You stop needing them to be different so that you can feel safe. Instead, you meet them where they are, with the patience of someone who knows that everything unfolds in its time. Even your work takes on a new shape. You begin to ask not what will get the most recognition, but what will still feel honest in 10 years. You stop living for the next hit of praise and start living for something steadier: integrity, truth, depth. Cosmic time doesn't remove sorrow, but it holds it differently. A grief held within a human-sized moment can feel crushing, but a grief held within a vastness that knows cycles, that knows return, becomes something else. Not lighter, but more whole, more bearable, more part of the story. There's also a humility that comes with this view, the kind that doesn't shame you, but frees you. You don't have to have it all figured out. No one does, not the wisest teacher, not the most experienced practitioner. Everyone is walking through the dark, holding a small light, learning, falling, returning. That return is the heart of Buddhist practice. You don't need to get it right once. You need to return again and again to what is true, Cosmic time gives you permission to do that without rushing, without shame, without comparison. This view doesn't ask you to abandon your responsibilities. It asks you to see them within context. The conversation you're having today matters, but it's not the whole story. The mistakes you've made are real, but they don't define you. The beauty you feel is precious, but it's not the only beauty you'll ever know. Everything becomes part of a wider unfolding, and in that unfolding, you begin to relax, not into laziness, but into trust. You trust that life is bigger than your plans, that growth is not linear, that progress is not measured in milestones, but in presence, in returning to what matters, even when it's hard, even when you've failed, especially then. Cosmic time teaches you to breathe through change, to allow uncertainty, to hold both effort and surrender in the same hand. You act, but you don't grip. You care, but you don't cling. This shift is not mental, it's lived. It shows up in your posture, in your voice, in how you respond when things don't go your way. It shows up in your relationship to endings. You begin to let go, not just with grief, but with reverence. And you begin to live more simply, because so many of your complications were built around speed, around the belief that it all had to happen now. When that falls away, your choices become clearer, your days less cluttered, your mind more spacious. This spaciousness becomes your refuge, a place you carry with you, not found in any one moment, but in every moment you remember to zoom out, to soften, to rest in the truth that you are already part of something vast and timeless. You no longer seek peace by controlling time. You find peace by stepping outside of it. And in that stepping, the need to rush dissolves. What remains is the ground beneath your feet, the breath in your body, the presence in your gaze, each one ancient, each one whole, each one enough. So time expands, not because the hours grow longer, but because your grip on them loosens. You no longer feel pushed from behind or pulled from ahead. With the view of vast cycles and infinite unfolding, the race to be somewhere else finally starts to lose its power. There's nothing left to chase when you realize there is nowhere to arrive, only layers of presence to return to. But there is one more thread that continues this soft unraveling of urgency. One more way the heart finds stillness without fleeing life. It begins where you thought you would lose something, but end up finding space. It begins with letting go. Renunciation is often misunderstood. It sounds like rejection, like deprivation, like saying no to joy. But in Buddhist wisdom, renunciation is not a punishment. It is a doorway. Not a door you're pushed through, but one you walk through by choice. Not because you hate what's on the other side, but because what's behind it has grown too loud, too heavy, too much. Renunciation is not turning away from life. It is turning toward it, cleared of clutter, cleared of noise, cleared of the demands that make it hard to feel what really matters. Letting go is not about having less, it's about holding less. Less tension, less grasping, less attachment to outcomes, identities, and stories that no longer fit. When you begin to release the excess, what remains is not emptiness. It is clarity. It is breath. It is a kind of grounded freedom that doesn't need distraction to feel full. Voluntary simplicity is a form of wisdom. It is the understanding that you do not have to become a monk to live a clear life. You do not have to give away all your belongings to touch peace. What you release is not for appearance, it is for spaciousness. When you simplify from the inside, something within you starts to rest. Not because the world stops asking, but because you stop answering every call with your energy. In a society that teaches accumulation as success, choosing less is seen as weakness. But in truth, renunciation is strength. It is not withdrawal, it is precision. Knowing what to say no to, knowing when to step back, knowing how to stop feeding what drains you. This kind of knowing is only possible when you slow down long enough to hear your own inner voice again. What makes this practice so powerful is that it changes how you experience time. When your life is full of unneeded things, physical, mental, emotional, you are always running behind. Your energy is scattered, your mind is full but not focused, your days are busy but not meaningful. Letting go doesn't make time expand, it removes what was filling it with noise. This begins with awareness, noticing the weight of what you carry, not just bags or schedules, but beliefs. Beliefs that say more is always better, that silence is a threat, that stillness is lazy. These thoughts are invisible walls. They shape how you live, how you feel, how fast you move. When you question them, the walls begin to crack. When you release them, you begin to feel how much more space there was all along. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means pausing to ask, is this mine to hold? Is this thought, this obligation, this pressure truly necessary? Or have I just been carrying it because everyone else is too? You begin to feel this most clearly in small acts, not answering every message immediately, not agreeing to every request, not filling every gap in the day with stimulation. These are not refusals, they are returns. Returning to your own rhythm, to your own enoughness, to the moment that keeps offering itself if only you would clear the space to receive it. Renunciation is not just about things, it's also about speed. The drive to rush is its own form of possession. You can be holding nothing in your hands, but still be full of momentum, addicted to urgency. Letting go of speed is often more difficult than letting go of stuff, but it is also more freeing. This freedom shows up in how you wake up in the morning. Do you reach for your phone immediately, filling your mind before the sun has risen in your chest? Or do you sit for a moment and greet the silence as a friend? It shows up in how you eat. Do you consume food while planning your next move, treating your meal like fuel for more performance? Or do you allow the act of nourishment to slow you into gratitude? It shows up in how you listen. Are you waiting to speak, preparing your reply, multitasking in your mind? Or are you empty enough to receive someone's words without needing to fix, judge, or add? Each moment holds the possibility of renunciation, not dramatic, not public, not even visible to others, but deeply real, letting go of needing to be right, letting go of needing to win, letting go of needing to defend a version of yourself that no longer fits. This kind of release doesn't make life smaller, it makes it more whole. It connects you again to what was buried beneath the busy. You start to see how much of your anxiety was fed by your own resistance. How many of your problems came not from the world, but from trying to hold everything perfectly in place. And when you begin to live with less internal resistance, you begin to move through time differently. no longer bracing for the next task, no longer editing every moment for usefulness, no longer needing to be impressive. You begin to dwell, to feel, to stay. Renunciation brings humility, but not shame. You learn to admit when you've taken on too much. You learn to step away without guilt. You learn to walk away from what you could dominate in favor of what invites peace. This doesn't mean your life becomes passive. It becomes clearer. You still act, still work, still contribute, but from alignment, not from noise. You no longer make choices based on fear of missing out or fear of falling behind. You choose from silence, from truth, from enoughness. The teachings remind us. Craving is endless. You feed it, it grows. You satisfy one desire, another appears. This is not a flaw, it's how the mind protects itself. But when you understand that desire is not a command, only a movement, you gain space. You begin to see what happens when you don't obey every urge. And that space between craving and action is where freedom grows. You begin to observe your own mind with more compassion. You see its patterns, you see its grasping, you see its stories of urgency. And slowly, gently, you begin to loosen your attachment to them. Not because you're trying to be holy, but because you're tired of the noise. Tired of believing that peace is on the other side of achievement. Tired of measuring worth by comparison. Tired of chasing what leaves you hollow. This is where letting go becomes medicine, and it touches everything. How you spend money, how you decorate your space, how you respond to conflict. You stop needing to win arguments. You stop needing to explain yourself. You stop needing every opinion to be heard. Silence becomes a choice, not a defeat. Letting go also reveals your deepest values, because once you strip away what is not essential, what remains is what truly matters. Kindness, truth, presence, connection. These are not things you can grasp, they are qualities you inhabit. And so, time slows. Not because you are doing less, but because you are finally with what you are doing. Because your energy is no longer scattered. Because your attention is no longer divided. You are here, fully. This kind of presence cannot be forced. It must be invited. And renunciation is the invitation. It says, let this go. Not forever, just now, just long enough to see what it's covering, what it's costing, what it's replacing. Letting go becomes a rhythm, a return. You begin to feel when something no longer serves, when a habit has run its course, when a role is no longer honest. You let go not because you are brave, but because something more quiet is calling. And because you have begun to trust that what is real will remain. This trust is what allows time to soften. The future no longer looms with threat. The past no longer traps you with guilt. You begin to rest in the middle, where life is not asking you to prove anything, just to live with care. And this care, this devotion to presence over pressure, begins to shape how you meet every moment, lightly, kindly, without hurry. Because you know now, what you release creates space for what's true. What you let go of returns to stillness. What you no longer carry opens your hands for wonder. And that wonder, quiet as it may be, is the deepest kind of joy. Not because it lasts forever, but because it's finally allowed to be felt. Fully. Here. Now. So the grip softens. The reaching quiets. The space you've cleared by letting go is no longer filled with the pressure to refill it. That space becomes a kind of sanctuary, simple, uncluttered, and honest. It offers something most people never notice they're missing: the permission not to explain, not to prove, not to perform. There is peace in that stillness, but it's not just the peace of doing less. It's the peace that rises when you stop needing to speak at all. From that quiet ground, another layer begins to unfold, not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence, the kind the Buddha called Aryo Tunhibhavo, noble silence. This silence is not about muting the world. It is about stepping out of the compulsion to constantly define yourself. It is about pausing the endless urge to explain what you are, what you believe, what you've done, and why you matter. It is not silence as emptiness, but silence as full awareness, where nothing needs to be said to be deeply known. In noble silence, communication does not disappear. It becomes subtler, more alive. The usual noise of language, where words chase after control or validation, begins to fall away. What remains is deeper than speech: stillness that listens, presence that feels, attention that holds. This is not forced. It arises naturally when the mind begins to trust that it doesn't need to fill every moment, that not everything needs an answer, that clarity doesn't always arrive through dialogue. In fact, sometimes words only create more distance. The Buddha practiced noble silence often, not to isolate himself, but because he understood that certain truths could not be transmitted through speech. They could only be pointed to through stillness. He knew that silence carries its own kind of teaching, one that bypasses the intellect and touches something more direct. When you practice noble silence, you begin to see how much of your talking is rooted in anxiety, the urge to be understood, the fear of being judged, the need to shape someone's opinion of you. Even casual conversations often carry this subtle need to be seen in a certain way. But when you step into silence willingly, without resentment or resistance, you begin to peel those layers back. You stop trying to manage perception. You start trusting presence. This kind of silence invites a profound kind of rest, not because nothing is happening, but because there's no longer a need to shape every moment. You begin to feel the texture of your own thoughts without rushing to share them. You start to notice what rises when you're not busy organizing your words for someone else. In this space, your awareness becomes sharper. You start to hear the background noise of your own mind, the assumptions, the judgments, the rehearsed opinions, and in noticing them, they begin to soften. Not because you shut them down, but because you no longer feed them. This clarity helps you relate to others differently. You stop filling the air with explanations. You stop rescuing every silence with your voice. You begin to trust that being with someone silently is not a failure of connection. It is a deeper expression of it. There is intimacy in shared silence that no conversation can replace, a kind of mutual recognition that says, "I do not need to perform for you. I do not need to entertain or impress you. I am here, and so are you." This kind of presence takes practice. At first, it can feel uncomfortable. Silence brings things to the surface. It reveals the discomfort we've been covering with chatter. But once you stay long enough, the discomfort changes. It becomes honesty. It becomes clarity. It becomes ease. Noble silence is not the same as withdrawal. It is not about isolating yourself or refusing connection. It is about removing what is unnecessary so that what is essential can be felt. You begin to see that many of your words were strategies, a way to keep distance, to avoid discomfort, to control outcomes. Silence dissolves those strategies. It leaves you naked in the best way, undefended, authentic, real. This practice also brings you closer to your inner voice, not the voice of thought, but the voice of intuition. When the external noise quiets, you begin to hear the guidance that was always there, just waiting for space. This inner knowing doesn't speak in arguments or explanations. It moves like water, subtle, patient, clear. And the more you listen to it, the less you need to convince anyone of anything. You stop using speech to prove yourself. You stop using stories to hold your identity together. You begin to live from something deeper than words. In silence, time also changes. A single breath stretches. A moment of stillness reveals depth you never noticed before. The mind, no longer reaching for the next thing to say, starts to sink into the now. Not because you try to be present, but because presence is what's left when speaking stops. This is why noble silence is not passive. It's a dynamic, awake stillness. It is the space where truth can rise unedited, where emotion can unfold without analysis, where clarity can emerge without construction. You start to understand that not every insight needs to be spoken to be real, that some of the most important shifts in your life will happen in silence, and they will not need anyone else to validate them. You will feel them as truth, not because you said them, but because you lived them. This transforms how you speak when you do speak. Your words become fewer, but they carry more weight. They come from stillness, not reaction. They are measured not in quantity, but in depth. You begin to speak when there is something real to say, not just to fill a pause or escape a feeling. Even the way you listen begins to change. You stop thinking of your reply while someone else is speaking. You let their words land. You make space for their pauses. You hold the silence between sentences without fear. This makes others feel safe, seen, respected. And when you sit with yourself in silence, the same thing happens. You begin to meet your own inner life without needing to fix it immediately. You start to hold space for your confusion, your sorrow, your longing, not to solve them, but to let them be what they are. This gentle attention becomes its own form of healing, because silence does not demand that anything change. It offers space for things to simply be. That spaciousness reveals a new kind of time. Not chronological time, but felt time. Time measured in presence, not in minutes. In this kind of time, even short moments feel full. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is wasted. Everything belongs. Noble silence becomes a way of returning, not to an idea, but to a living truth. That your deepest clarity does not need to be shouted. That your truest peace arises when the noise falls away. That the person you are, beneath all the words, is already enough. And so you keep listening, not just to sounds, but to silence itself. You discover that silence is not empty. It is full of everything you've been missing while you were too busy speaking. It is not a punishment. It is a home. And once you've entered it, you start to bring it with you. Into every word you do choose to speak, into every pause you allow, into every moment you decide not to fill. This is not withdrawal from the world. This is presence, fully embodied, where nothing needs to be said, and yet everything is understood. So you return to silence, not as something foreign, but as something deeply familiar. It no longer feels like absence, but presence without decoration. You find that what you were searching for through explanation was here all along, in the pause that needed no words. From this place, the heart begins to settle, not through effort, but through release. And with that release comes a new kind of readiness, to look directly at what most try to avoid. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because what remains silent in our lives is often what speaks the loudest, and nothing speaks more clearly when truly listened to than death. Contemplating death is not about fear or darkness. It is not a morbid fixation. It is a way of remembering what is true, a way of peeling back the distractions that keep you from feeling the depth of your life. This reflection, known in the Buddhist tradition as Maranasati, is one of the most powerful tools to loosen the grip of urgency, not by taking you out of life, but by pulling you deeper into it. When you remember death, not just as an idea, but as a certainty, your priorities shift. The things that seemed urgent lose their sharpness. The things you were rushing toward stop demanding so much energy. This is not about despair, it's about perspective. You begin to understand that time is not just limited, it's sacred. And sacred things are not meant to be rushed. The practice of Maranasati brings you face to face with the truth that nothing lasts. Not your youth, not your roles, not your possessions, not even your name. When this truth is held gently, it doesn't lead to panic, it leads to freedom. You stop trying to hold what cannot be held. You stop bargaining with impermanence. You begin to live with eyes open. This clarity creates space to choose how you live instead of being pushed by fear. Because so much of the compulsion to live fast comes from the unspoken anxiety that you're running out of time, that you must do more, see more, become more before it's too late. But what if the point is not to do more, but to be more present in what you are already doing? Contemplating death doesn't ask you to reject life. It asks you to stop taking it for granted, to meet it with reverence instead of rush. When you accept that every breath is borrowed, you begin to breathe differently, slower, deeper, with gratitude instead of pressure. This practice is not just philosophical, it is physical. When you sit with the reality of death, your nervous system responds. It begins to let go of tension you didn't even know you were carrying, because deep down you have always known that control is an illusion, that clinging only makes the letting go more painful, and that freedom lives in allowing each moment to be enough as it is. Maranasati is not a one-time reflection. It is a lifelong practice, a way of checking in, of asking, if this were my last hour, would I be proud of how I am spending it? Would I be rushing? Would I be pretending? Would I be lost in thought or awake in my life? These questions are not meant to create guilt. They are meant to wake you up, not in panic, but in presence, to shift your focus from appearance to essence, from perfection to sincerity. You stop chasing the life you think you're supposed to have and begin inhabiting the life you already do. This practice also reveals what matters. You begin to notice what pulls you out of presence, the conversations that drain you, the habits that numb you, the distractions that eat your time without feeding your soul, and slowly you begin to let them go, not out of discipline, but out of clarity, because what once felt urgent now feels empty, When death becomes your teacher, your life becomes simpler, not smaller, but clearer. You stop wasting energy on things that won't matter when your breath runs out. You stop waiting for the right moment to love, to forgive, to rest. You start now, because now is all you ever really had. This awareness also changes how you meet others. You begin to understand that everyone you encounter is also walking toward their own end. This doesn't create distance, it creates tenderness. You speak more kindly, you listen more deeply, you forgive more easily. Not because people deserve it, but because time is too precious to carry unnecessary weight. You stop needing to win, to be right, to be seen in a certain light. You start valuing peace over pride, connection over correction, stillness over stimulation. These shifts are subtle, but they are real, and they ripple outward into every corner of your life. Contemplating death also helps you accept change. You begin to see that all endings are connected. The end of a day, the end of a season, the end of a role or identity. These small deaths prepare you for the larger one, not with fear, but with presence. You stop resisting the natural cycles of life. You begin to trust them. This trust brings rest. You no longer feel you have to outrun the clock. You begin to live in rhythm with your own breath, not the timeline of culture. You stop measuring your life in comparison to others. You start measuring it in truth, in meaning, in alignment, and even your fears begin to shift. Because once you face the biggest fear, the end, you begin to notice how much of your daily anxiety is rooted in illusions. Fear of being left out, fear of failure, fear of being misunderstood. These lose their grip when you know what is truly at stake. You learn to hold grief more gently too, not as something to be fixed, but as something to be felt. Because loss is no longer a surprise, it is part of the path. You no longer feel betrayed by impermanence. You begin to walk with it. This walking is not heavy, it is grounded, real, quietly joyful, because when you know your days are numbered, you stop taking them for granted. You stop needing every moment to be perfect, and you start needing it to be real. You begin to cherish the ordinary, the cup of tea, the sound of the wind, the eyes of someone you love. These things do not last, and that is why they matter. You stop waiting for life to be extraordinary and start seeing the sacredness in what is already here. This is not spiritual bypassing. It is the opposite. It is meeting the truth directly and choosing to love anyway, to stay anyway, to soften anyway. You live not in denial of death, but in harmony with it. And from this place, you begin to move differently. Not out of pressure, but out of care. You speak when it matters. You rest when you need to. You show up more fully because you know you won't always have the chance. This is the paradox. The more you contemplate death, the more alive you become. Not frantic, not desperate, but rooted, present, free. Because when you stop clinging to life, life begins to meet you, not as something to be controlled, but as something to be received. And that receiving is not passive. It is awake. It is humble. It is real. It asks nothing but your presence, and it gives everything in return. You begin to live as if each moment could be your last, not with dread, but with devotion. You bow to the now, not because it is perfect, but because it is true. And in that bowing, the rush dissolves, the fear dissolves, and what remains is quiet, spacious, whole. When you no longer fear the end, the beginning starts to feel more honest. Life, stripped of illusion, becomes something quieter, something simpler. You stop trying to hold on so tightly, and that loosening becomes a gateway to a different rhythm altogether. One not built by deadlines, but by awareness. A pace not shaped by fear, but by trust. As death becomes less of a threat and more of a teacher, you start to wonder, what would it be like to live each day in full alignment with that awareness? Not in theory, but in action. Not in thought, but in how you move, speak, eat, and rest. This question is not new. It has been lived for generations by those who chose to step away from the rush and into the forest. In the Thai forest tradition, stillness is not a retreat from life, it is life. The monks who follow this path do not isolate themselves to escape. They enter the forest not to reject the world, but to see it more clearly, to meet it without distraction, to listen so deeply that even the silence begins to speak. Their way is not about withdrawal, it is about alignment. Everything from the way they eat to the way they walk is shaped by presence. There is no multitasking, no rushing, no unnecessary words. Each movement is deliberate. Each task is complete in itself. There is nothing casual about how they relate to time, because time to them is not something to manage, it is something to meet fully. The forest teaches them how to do this. In the forest, seasons do not rush, trees do not force growth, light changes gradually, rain arrives when it's ready. The body begins to fall into that rhythm. The breath lengthens, the heart softens, the nervous system no longer braces against pressure. There is no need to prove anything. There is only the invitation to be in harmony with what is already unfolding. This harmony is not passive, it is awake. These monks rise before dawn. Their days are structured by simplicity, not filled with excess. Alms rounds are walked barefoot, step by step, through villages. Meals are taken quietly, in reflection. The robes are sewn by hand. The mind is trained through repetition, through solitude, through silence. It is not easy, but it is clear. And that clarity brings a kind of freedom that most people never touch, not because it is out of reach, but because it requires stepping away from everything that keeps us busy. The forest does not demand brilliance, it asks for humility. And in that humility, something returns, a sense of wholeness, a sense of rhythm that modern life has forgotten. The monks are not racing time, they are watching it, not with judgment, but with curiosity. They see how thoughts rise and fall, how craving comes and goes, how the mind tells stories, and how silence dissolves them. They learn to recognize what is real, not in words, but in presence. In this space, even basic activities become sacred. Sweeping the forest path becomes a form of meditation. Drinking water becomes a way to feel connection to the body. Sitting in stillness becomes the most honest way to meet the mind. There is no separation between the practice and the moment. Life itself becomes the practice. This is not something exclusive to monastics. It is a reminder that slowness is available wherever sincerity exists. That you do not need to wear robes to live deliberately. That simplicity is not a setting, it is a choice. And that choice can be made in a forest or in a city. It can be made in solitude or in the middle of daily responsibilities. What the Thai forest tradition offers is not a formula. It is a living example of what happens when a human being steps fully into rhythm with nature. Not just outer nature, but inner nature. The nature of thoughts, of moods, of breath, of awareness itself. Their stillness is not empty. It is full of attention, full of careful observation. They speak little, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned that most things are better understood through silence. They do not correct others quickly because they have learned to trust the process of internal realization. Patience becomes a natural result of seeing clearly, and that patience changes how time is experienced. Time stops being something to survive. It becomes something to enter, to listen to open within. The monks often repeat the same chants, the same forms, the same routines, not out of superstition, but because repetition itself is a mirror. It shows them the mind's resistance. It reveals its craving for novelty. And in the mirror of the ordinary, they find insight. This insight doesn't arrive in dramatic flashes. It comes slowly, like dew collecting on a leaf. A soft recognition that nothing needs to be added, that the truth is not elsewhere, that awakening is not another achievement. It is the releasing of what was never needed. In their teachings, these monks speak simply. They do not try to impress. They speak from their own lived experience. Often, the most profound truths are spoken in a few words, because stillness has taught them that clarity does not need decoration. Their presence says more than their speech. You feel it when they walk, when they sit, when they listen. There is no rush in their movements, no grasping in their eyes. They are fully where they are, and being in their presence reminds others how to return to that place in themselves. You begin to realize that this path is not about reaching something new. It is about remembering what was covered by distraction, by worry, by the pressure to always be becoming. The monks do not rush toward enlightenment. They sit with what is, and in that sitting, something deep begins to unravel. You begin to see how much of your own life is shaped by momentum, not because it must be, but because it has become habit. The forest path shows another way, one step, one breath, one task. Complete, sincere, unhurried. This way does not reject emotion. It does not seek to numb. The monks feel joy and sorrow, fear and gratitude, but they do not become lost in those waves. They learn to watch the changing nature of experience, and in doing so, they gain a kind of steadiness that cannot be shaken by circumstance. The forest is not a place of escape. It is a mirror. It shows the mind clearly, without distraction, without compromise. And what is seen there is not always comfortable, but it is always real. And in that reality, transformation becomes possible, not through force, but through presence. What you learn from these monastics is not just how to sit still. You learn how to live still, how to move with care, how to speak with intention, how to be with yourself in a way that is honest. You learn that peace is not hidden behind intensity. It is available in the moment you stop trying to speed past your own life. The trees do not compete. The rivers do not hurry. The forest teaches not through concept, but through rhythm. And those who learn its rhythm begin to live from a deeper place, a place where time slows, where breath steadies, where mind becomes clear. This is not about adopting a tradition. It is about remembering your own capacity for simplicity, for silence, for being fully alive without needing to rush or explain it. The forest monks live this not as an ideal, but as a practice, a discipline of slowness, a devotion to presence. And so their stillness is not a pause in life. It is the very expression of life lived well. Their example whispers a question to all who meet them. What are you rushing toward that cannot be found in this step, in this breath, in this exact moment? And with that question, the heart returns. The noise recedes, the pace softens, and what remains is not emptiness, but enough. Not escape, but arrival. Not performance, but truth. Right here, in the stillness that was never far, only forgotten. The stillness of the forest doesn't just quiet the body. It begins to dissolve the structure of thought. You stop moving through life on mental autopilot and start resting in a space where each moment reveals itself without needing to be forced. That simplicity offers more than clarity. It offers a portal. Because when presence deepens beyond habit, beyond even intention, something else begins to unfold. Not stillness as behavior, but as direct experience. The kind of stillness that completely alters your sense of time, of identity, of separation. And within the Buddhist path, that deep absorption is known as jhana. Jhana is not simply about meditating longer or focusing harder. It is not a goal to accomplish or a trophy to collect. It is a state of being where the usual tension of self-reference fades. Thought slows, not because you're trying to stop it, but because there is no longer anything for it to revolve around. Attention begins to hold itself, no longer jumping from one object to another. Distractions fall away. The need to fix, to name, to track time, all of it becomes irrelevant. The mind settles inward, and the felt experience of reality shifts. To enter jhana, effort gives way to surrender. It starts with sustained attention, usually on the breath. But not just noticing the breath as a concept, actually staying with it, continuously, with interest. Not pushing, not spacing out, just gently keeping the mind there, like resting your hand on still water without disturbing its surface. As the attention becomes more refined, the usual sense of separation between observer and object weakens. Awareness begins to fold inward, not as disconnection, but as depth. In the early stages, there is still some knowing of time. You are aware that minutes are passing. But as the mind becomes more absorbed, time begins to dissolve. The clock doesn't stop, but your experience of it does. You are no longer moving through moments. You are resting in a field where moments do not need to be measured. What remains is continuity, a sense of still presence that does not require mental commentary to confirm it exists. These states are characterized by increasing levels of stability, joy, clarity, and equanimity. The first jhana may still involve some thought, but it's infused with a deep sense of rapture and one-pointedness. The second, third, and fourth become increasingly quiet, increasingly subtle, increasingly undisturbed. By the time the mind reaches the higher jhanas, there is no craving for experience to be different. There is no story of becoming. There is no pressure to hold on. The mind has entered a state where time, identity, and resistance are no longer shaping perception. This is not spacing out. It's the opposite. Jhana is an intensification of awareness, not a dulling of it. But the awareness is no longer concerned with the usual markers. It doesn't care what time it is. It doesn't divide the breath from the breather. It does not worry about outcomes. It simply rests. And that resting is so complete that even the idea of resting disappears. The Buddha described jhana as both pleasurable and skillful, not because it feeds craving, but because it refines the mind. It trains attention to stay, to feel the nuance of experience without clinging, to enter stillness without fear. And it shows you that the mind can know reality without needing to break it into pieces. Many people think of meditation as a tool to relax, but jhana shows that it is much more. It is a pathway to seeing how deeply conditioned the normal mind is by time, by thought, by identity. And when those structures pause, what's left is not confusion. It's peace, not the peace of escape, but the peace of contact, real contact, with experience as it actually is. The insight gained from these states carries into daily life. You begin to see how artificial much of your stress is, how constructed your urgency is, how so much of what seemed important was simply built around keeping your thoughts entertained. After touching jhana, even briefly, the mind begins to recognize that it doesn't need to be so loud. That silence is not absence, it is completion. This realization begins to shift how you relate to ordinary experience. You stop rushing toward stimulation. You become more comfortable with simplicity. Your nervous system, having felt what it's like to rest in undivided attention, begins to crave less noise. You no longer need to escape your life through activity. You start seeing beauty in stillness. This has practical effects. Your concentration improves. Your reactions soften. You pause more before speaking. You stop multitasking. Because now, divided attention feels unnatural. The mind has tasted what it means to be whole, and wholeness doesn't chase. You also become more sensitive, not in the emotional sense, but in your perception. You begin to feel the subtleties of sensation, thought, and mood as they arise. You see how they shift, how they fade, how they are not you. This allows you to hold them more lightly, not because you're detached, but because you understand that they are not permanent. You stop being pulled by every passing wave. Jhana also trains ethical stability, because in the process of settling the mind, the hindrances become clear: desire, aversion, sloth, restlessness, doubt. These are not moral failures. They are natural obstacles, but when you see them directly, not as thoughts about them, but as energetic experiences, you begin to relate to them differently. They no longer drive behavior. They arise, they pass, and you remain. This inner training creates a new relationship with time outside of meditation. You begin to live with less resistance. You trust that things unfold. You no longer demand that everything happen on your schedule. You allow, and in that allowing, you find rhythm. You also begin to prioritize different things, not because your values change overnight, but because your internal compass starts pointing in a new direction, toward depth, toward sincerity, toward presence. You start turning down what drains you. You start turning toward what steadies you. This doesn't make you rigid. It makes you real, because you stop needing every moment to be exciting. You start needing it to be true. The quiet becomes enough. The breath becomes enough. The now becomes enough. Even your sense of identity softens. You stop needing to define yourself through roles or achievements. The self begins to feel less like a solid thing and more like a process, something unfolding, shaped by attention, changing moment by moment. This doesn't lead to confusion. It leads to freedom. Because you stop defending a fixed version of yourself, you allow yourself to evolve. Jhana teaches that awareness doesn't need a story, it doesn't need a timeline, it doesn't need approval, it only needs willingness. Willingness to stay, to feel, to soften. And when that willingness is sustained, the mind begins to reveal its natural state, not fractured, but whole. And from that wholeness, action becomes more aligned, not rushed, not reactive, but clear, grounded, rooted in something deeper than habit. You begin to live less from urgency and more from trust, not blind trust, but trust born from direct experience, from knowing, not just believing, that the mind can rest, that time can slow, that peace is not somewhere else. It is what remains when the noise fades. This is not theoretical. It is something you feel in your bones. A slowing down that is not imposed, but invited. A spaciousness that is not manufactured, but discovered. And once you discover it, even once, something changes. You stop searching for freedom in the future. You begin to recognize it here, in the stillness that holds no deadline, in the breath that asks for nothing, in the moment that does not need to be chased. That moment, held in jhana, is not an escape from life. It is life, revealed, pure, unfiltered, whole. And once seen, it is never fully forgotten, because it leaves a trace, a quiet memory of how your mind can be when it stops trying to become and simply is. When the mind returns from deep stillness, from silence so complete it forgets time, it carries something back with it, not a memory, but a shift, a knowing, that life does not need to move fast to feel full. That awareness, when stable, can hold any moment without resistance. And as the attention moves outward again, toward the world of sound, sight, sensation, there is a new kind of sensitivity, not fragile, but awake. And with that sensitivity comes a responsibility to protect what has been remembered, to guard the clarity that was uncovered, to live in a way that honors that depth. This is where restraint becomes a form of care. Indriya samvara, or guarding the sense doors, is not about denial. It is not a life of repression or fear. It is a practice rooted in wisdom, a recognition that the senses are not passive and neither is attention. That what enters the mind through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and thoughts does not simply come and go. It shapes perception. It conditions behavior. It creates patterns that are hard to see until they have already taken root. This practice begins with awareness, with watching without judgment what draws you in, what stimulates you, what hooks your attention again and again, even when it leaves you scattered or drained. It means noticing how the eyes linger, how the ears tune into gossip, how the mind leaps toward stimulation without pause. Restraint does not mean never looking, never hearing, never engaging. It means engaging with care, with boundaries, with presence. Because unguarded senses lead to speed. Every image, every sound, every story becomes another input, another spark, another layer added to the mental load you're already carrying. And when the senses are constantly overwhelmed, the mind cannot settle. It is pulled in every direction. Reactivity becomes the norm. Impulse becomes the guide. Stillness becomes distant. Guarding the sense doors is a slowing down at the point of contact. It is saying, I will not allow everything in just because it's available. I will not consume endlessly just because the world wants my attention. It is not a rejection of life. It is a refinement of it, a commitment to quality over quantity, depth over speed. This refinement begins with seeing how quickly the senses trigger reactions. A sight becomes a craving, a sound becomes irritation, a smell becomes memory, a touch becomes grasping, a thought becomes identity. Each of these movements is fast, almost instant, but when you begin to guard the doors, you insert space. A pause, a chance to witness before responding. That space is where your freedom lives. Most people live as if they have no choice about what they respond to, but through restraint, choice returns. You see a desirable object, and instead of reaching, you notice. You feel anger arise from a sharp word, and instead of retaliating, you stay. You hear praise, and instead of clinging, you let it pass. Not because you're suppressing, but because you're observing, because you're allowing the experience to arise and fade without feeding it. This practice builds trust in your own mind. You begin to realize you don't need to chase every pleasant feeling or avoid every unpleasant one. You become less reactive, more stable, not numb, responsive. You move from compulsion to clarity. In daily life, this might look simple. You pause before picking up your phone. You choose silence instead of entertainment during a walk. You let go of background noise and allow the room to be quiet. You stop yourself from rereading the same headlines, the same opinions, the same arguments. Not because you're ignoring reality, but because you understand that not all input is nourishment. This restraint protects the mind's natural clarity, because clarity doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from seeing what is here. And when the mind is overloaded, it cannot see clearly. It gets lost in comparison, in stimulation, in craving. The senses are doorways, but without attention, they become floodgates. You begin to appreciate the simplicity of less distraction, less noise, less consumption. Not as a moral virtue, but as a practical necessity for inner stillness. The less you let in, the more you can feel. Not every movie, not every song, not every comment is needed. Some of them cost more than they offer, not in money, but in energy, in attention, in peace. Restraint is a kind of generosity to yourself and to others. When you guard your senses, you're less likely to speak from agitation, less likely to act from impulse, more likely to show up with presence. This presence is not something added. It is what remains when you stop scattering yourself, and from that place, your interactions begin to change. You're not as easily triggered. You don't jump into every debate. You listen more before reacting. You let people speak without needing to fix them. You bring stillness into the space just by how you receive it. This is how restraint transforms relationships, not by limiting connection, but by deepening it. Because when the senses are not constantly chasing stimulation, your attention becomes more refined. You start to notice the tone beneath the words, the emotion beneath the silence, the small moments that would otherwise be missed. This practice also helps you see the patterns of desire more clearly. How often the senses seek not for joy, but for escape. A quick image to avoid boredom, a loud sound to cover silence, a quick bite to avoid emotion. But when you guard the doors, you let the silence stay, you let the emotion rise. You begin to meet your life as it is, not just through filters. Over time, you realize that restraint doesn't lead to less life, it leads to more life, because you're actually there, not buried in reactions, not lost in stimulation, but present, engaged, real. The Buddha taught that the unguarded senses are a source of suffering, not because the senses themselves are wrong, but because they are powerful. They pull attention outward. They ignite craving. They create stories. But when guarded wisely, they become tools for awakening. Each sense door becomes a place of mindfulness, a place where wisdom meets the world. This practice also rewires urgency, because most of our speed is sensory, fast scrolling, fast switching, fast reacting. But when the senses are restrained, the system slows, the breath deepens, the need to jump from moment to moment starts to fade. And what takes its place is steadiness, the kind that holds attention without effort, that listens without judgment, that feels without grasping. This steadiness doesn't make life dull, it makes it vivid, because you are no longer numbed by excess. Even your perception of beauty changes. You begin to find it in quieter places, in natural rhythms, in the quality of attention, not in the intensity of stimulation. You no longer need loudness to feel alive. You begin to rest in subtlety. This shift brings relief, because chasing sensation is exhausting. It creates an inner restlessness that never ends. Restraint interrupts that cycle. It gives the system space to reset, to return to balance, to rest, not through escape, but through contact. And in that contact, the moment becomes enough. You stop needing more. You stop seeking elsewhere. You begin to recognize the completeness of what's already here, of the breath, of the silence, of the body simply sitting, awake. Indriya Samvara is not about control. It is about remembering you have a choice, that your senses can serve awareness, not distract from it, that each moment of restraint is not a loss, but a return. And with each return, the pace of life begins to align, not with habit, but with wisdom, not with urgency, but with clarity, not with noise, but with presence. So the world quiets, the senses soften. Attention is no longer scattered by every sound or shape that crosses your path. You begin to move with more care, not because you're trying to be careful, but because your energy no longer spills out through every doorway. Life feels more contained, more spacious, more yours. But as the external noise fades and your awareness grows more refined, something even more subtle comes into view. Not a sound, not a sight, not a touch, but the underlying assumption that runs beneath all of it, the sense that this moment is just one in a line, the idea that time is something moving forward, dragging you with it. But what if that idea isn't as solid as it seems? In Buddhist thought, time is a mental construction, a concept, or paññatti, something the mind uses to organize experience, not something that exists independently. We speak of past, present, and future as if they are real locations, But they are not places. They are ideas. They are labels placed on memory, awareness, and anticipation. Without those labels, what remains is experience, not occurring in time, but in awareness. This can be difficult to see because time is so woven into how we think, speak, plan, and feel. But the moment you begin to question it, not as a theory, but through direct observation, your relationship to everything changes. Stress softens, pressure lightens, urgency loses its grip. Because when time is not treated as absolute, neither is the story you've built within it. Start by noticing how time is felt. The sense that something happened before arises from memory. The thought that something might happen later arises from imagination. Both are mental events occurring now. The past does not exist except as memory happening now. The future does not exist except as thought happening now, and the present, when stripped of reference to the other two, cannot even be found. It is not a thing. It is what is. This is not abstract philosophy. It is practical insight, because when you start to see that time is not something pressing on you from outside, you stop fighting it. You stop feeling like you're falling behind. You stop living as if your value is tied to how quickly you move through imagined checkpoints. Even your goals begin to shift. You start to measure your life not by how much you get done in a day, but by how fully you meet each moment. You begin to see that running out of time is a thought, not a fact. And that thought can be questioned. When you question time, you are not denying that change happens. You are seeing that change does not need to be divided into segments. The mind slices experience into past, present, and future, but experience itself is seamless. Breathing happens, thought arises, sound occurs. None of these things are in time. They are simply happening. They are here. This understanding doesn't lead to passivity. It leads to immediacy. Because when you are not distracted by the story of what was or what might be, you begin to meet what is. Fully. Not as a stepping stone to later. Not as a bridge to somewhere else, but as reality itself. You begin to notice how often time is used as a form of control. The mind says, "Later I'll rest," or "Soon this will be better," or "One day I'll figure it out." These are all stories meant to delay presence. They offer comfort, but at a cost, because they keep you out of direct contact with life. Deconstructing time doesn't remove order. It removes the suffering created by believing that life must follow a fixed timeline, that you must be at a certain point, that you're behind or ahead. All of that is based on comparison, and comparison depends on time. Without it, things just are. You just are. Not behind, not late, not early, just present. And presence is not a point. It's not the middle of two lines. It's not a moment frozen in between what was and what will be. It is a movement without direction, awareness without edge, experience without reference. When the mind rests in this, something profound begins to unfold. Not a new state, not an altered reality, just life as it is, no longer edited by a timeline. This affects everything. Your pace of speech, your willingness to wait, your ability to forgive. Because so much of impatience, resentment, and fear is built on the idea that time is running out, that something must have already happened, that something must happen soon. But when that scaffolding collapses, All that remains is what you are actually living. The practice is not to stop using the concept of time. It's to stop believing it is real. Use it when needed, to make appointments, to plan meals, to navigate the world. But internally, let it soften. Let it be one tool among many, not the ground you stand on. When that softening happens, even difficult experiences change. Pain is no longer something to rush through. You are with it as it is. Joy is no longer something to prolong. You are with it as it arises and fades. Life is no longer a project. It is a process. You start to feel the rhythm of the present, not as a drumbeat moving forward, but as a hum, a field, a flow that needs no direction. And you learn to rest in that, not with effort, not with force, but with trust. This trust is not blind. It is born from observation, from seeing over and over that nothing ever actually happens in the future, that all fear and hope occur now, and that freedom comes not from managing time, but from seeing through it. This seeing brings simplicity. You do not need to plan your peace. You do not need to schedule your awakening. You stop waiting for the right time to rest, to speak, to love, to be still. The right time is a concept. Life is what's here. Even your identity begins to loosen. Because so much of who you think you are is a timeline, a story of what you've done and what you will do. But when you let that timeline fall away, you meet the self not as a role, but as awareness, not as a history, but as presence. This is not detachment, it is intimacy, because when the filter of time dissolves, you are no longer seeing life through layers of memory and expectation. You are seeing it directly. This directness reveals the richness of ordinary moments. A single breath becomes enough. A single gesture becomes full. You stop measuring experience by duration. You start feeling it by depth. And depth cannot be rushed. It is not something you do. It is something you stop doing. You stop rushing past. You stop overlaying commentary. You stop trying to get somewhere else. What arises is a kind of peace that is not based on circumstances. It is not something achieved after years. It is something recognized when time is seen for what it is, a story the mind tells to organize reality. When that story is transparent, so is fear, so is regret, so is striving. You begin to act, not from timeline, but from clarity. Not because you must reach a future, but because presence calls you to respond. Your life becomes less about getting somewhere and more about showing up here, fully, quietly, without rush. And in that showing up, everything changes, not because time has slowed, but because you have. Because the clock no longer tells you who to be. What tells you who to be now is awareness itself. And that awareness has no deadline. It does not measure your worth by what you've done. It does not divide your experience into achievements and failures. It simply meets life as it is, whole, unfolding, free. When the structure of time loses its grip, what remains is not confusion. It is choice. Without the pressure of a ticking clock or a personal timeline to uphold, the path forward becomes quieter, but not empty. It becomes responsive instead of reactive. And in this space, a new question naturally arises. If time is not pushing me, then what is guiding me? The answer lies in intention, because whether we are conscious of it or not, every action we take plants something. Every thought, every word, every response leaves an imprint. The quality of that imprint shapes not only our future experience, but the pace at which we move through life. This is where karma and speed meet. Karma, as taught in Buddhist understanding, is not fate. It is not destiny. It is the force of intention. Karma means action, not just physical movement, but volition. It is the energy behind what we do, why we do it, and how we relate to the results. And it functions in real time, not as punishment or reward, but as a pattern that either creates more agitation or more clarity. When our actions are unconscious, rushed, or fueled by greed, fear, or craving, we don't just create outcomes, we create momentum. That momentum keeps the mind spinning. It feeds restlessness. It accelerates dissatisfaction. It keeps us running even when there's nowhere to go. Every impulsive choice strengthens the habit of speed. Every reactive word reinforces the pattern of reaching. Over time, this creates not only stress, but distortion. We begin to perceive life through the lens of urgency, even when there's no real danger. The nervous system stays activated, the body becomes tense, thought becomes fast and shallow. But karma is not fixed. Its momentum can be altered the moment we shift the quality of our attention. When actions are rooted in mindfulness, they slow down. When speech arises from clarity, it becomes fewer and more meaningful. When choices are made with awareness of cause and effect, behavior becomes less compulsive and more skillful. This is where pace and ethics meet. The more conscious our intentions, the more space we allow around each response. This space does not paralyze, it liberates, because speed is often a symptom of reactivity. We react quickly when we're afraid, when we're unsure, when we're attached to outcome. But when we understand karma deeply, we begin to trust the process. We begin to trust that right effort, rooted in wisdom and compassion, will bear fruit, even if it takes time. That trust alone slows us down. The slowing is not mechanical, it's organic. When you care about the impact of your action, you naturally pause, you reflect, you sense the ripple before you drop the stone. That pause is not hesitation, it is reverence. It is attention being shaped by care rather than fear. Over time, this rewires how you relate to decision-making. You stop needing to fix everything immediately. You learn to let things unfold, not because you're passive, but because you understand that forcing things too quickly often creates more suffering. Patience becomes a form of wisdom. Not because it delays progress, but because it ensures alignment. When intention becomes your guide, pace becomes less frantic. There's less need to be efficient if it compromises presence. There's less craving for quick results. Instead, there's a quiet trust in the process of planting wholesome seeds. You begin to act with long-term awareness, not short-term gain. That shift in orientation changes the texture of your life. It softens the edges. Even relationships are affected. You become less likely to react with blame or defensiveness. You begin to ask, what energy am I bringing into this exchange? Is this response coming from clarity or from a habitual pattern? That question alone slows the cycle of reactivity and opens the possibility for something new. This also changes your understanding of effort. In a culture that equates busyness with productivity, it can feel strange to do less. But conscious action is not lazy. It is precise. When you act with clarity, you often need less energy to create more meaningful outcomes. Your presence becomes more focused. Your speech becomes more direct. You move with less friction. Intentionality also interrupts karmic loops, the ones that repeat without our awareness, the patterns that lead us back to the same frustration, the same conflict, the same regret. When you begin to see those patterns clearly and respond differently, you break their momentum. That's not just spiritual, it's practical. You stop creating the same problems. You begin to live with fewer apologies, fewer corrections, fewer repairs. This practice also brings humility, because the more you understand karma, the more you see how much you don't control. You see that your intentions are only part of the picture, that outcomes depend on many conditions, that good intentions don't always bring immediate peace, but that doesn't mean they're wasted. It means you trust the field, not just the harvest. That trust allows you to act without clinging. You give fully without needing return. You speak truthfully without forcing agreement. You show up consistently without demanding recognition. This is not self-sacrifice. It is freedom from the speed that comes from needing to prove something. Karma also teaches discernment. You begin to notice which actions come from a clear place and which come from avoidance, which choices are rooted in love and which are masked attempts at control. This inner honesty slows you down, not because you're unsure, but because you're unwilling to betray your own values for the sake of speed. There is also kindness in this path, because when you become more conscious of your own actions, you stop judging others so harshly. You realize how easy it is to act out of habit. You understand how reactivity is shaped by pain, by conditioning, by fear. And that understanding becomes compassion. You stop rushing others to change. You start trusting that transformation takes time. This reshapes the very meaning of progress. It's no longer about doing more in less time. It's about doing what aligns, regardless of how long it takes. The measure becomes sincerity, not speed, presence, not performance. You begin to notice how peace grows when you don't chase it, how insight deepens when you don't force it, how the quality of each moment improves when intention is clear and pressure is low. Life becomes less like a sprint and more like a walk through a garden, where you tend, you nourish, and you allow space. This is not idealism, it is discipline, because acting with awareness requires effort. But it's a different kind of effort, not fueled by stress, but guided by clarity, not driven by fear, but grounded in care. And this care becomes the center of your movement, the anchor of your choices, the rhythm of your day. You stop pushing, you start aligning, you stop rushing, you start listening. And from this place, your life becomes less reactive and more intentional, less noisy and more steady. Not because the world slows down, but because you do. And in that slowing, karma becomes not just a law, but a path of conscious planting, of mindful movement, of quiet power. A path where each step matters, not because of where it leads, but because of how it's made. Because intention, once seen clearly, is the pace of freedom. When you begin to live from intention instead of reaction, movement becomes more honest. Choices lose their tension. The pressure to act just to feel in control fades. You stop chasing efficiency and start aligning your life with meaning. As karma reveals the link between habit and suffering, it becomes clear that much of our modern discomfort is not from doing too little, but from doing too much, too fast, for reasons we barely question. The craving to be productive, to always be improving, to constantly be seen as achieving, this is rarely recognized as a form of bondage. But the teachings point to a different path, one where how you live matters more than what you produce, where rhythm matters more than results, where work becomes part of the path, not a detour from it. This is the heart of right livelihood. The Buddha's Eightfold Path includes livelihood for a reason. Work is not separate from practice. It's one of the most consistent places your ethics, awareness, and values are tested. Yet in many modern cultures, work has become disconnected from well-being. Productivity has become the measurement of worth. Busyness has become a badge of honor, and the result is not just fatigue, but alienation, a sense that life is being spent, not lived. Right livelihood does not mean the right job title or income bracket. It means that the way you earn your living supports, rather than distorts, your path. It means that what you do and how you do it does not cause harm to yourself or others. Not just physical harm, but psychological, emotional, and spiritual harm. It means your work doesn't pull you away from presence, but roots you in it. This principle challenges many common assumptions. Because modern work culture often promotes speed over presence, quantity over care, growth over balance. But the teachings offer a radical alternative, a life that values rhythm, a pace that supports awareness, an economy of meaning, not just money. Letting go of the obsession with productivity is not laziness, it is clarity. It is a return to the understanding that your value is not based on how much you produce, but on how you show up, on whether your actions are rooted in compassion, not competition, on whether your work deepens connection or creates disconnection. This requires inner honesty. Because the craving for productivity is often not about the work itself. It's about identity, about proving you are good enough, about avoiding discomfort, about being too busy to feel. Right livelihood asks you to confront those motives. It asks you to slow down enough to ask, what is this effort serving? Is this work aligned with truth, or is it a mask for fear? In practical terms, this might mean re-evaluating the kind of work you do, but more often it means changing the way you relate to it, bringing presence to tasks that feel ordinary. Letting go of multitasking, creating space between tasks to reflect, breathe, recalibrate. Valuing the inner state you work from as much as the outer result. The teachings do not prescribe specific careers. They ask you to examine impact. Does this work cause harm, even indirectly? Does it exploit, deceive, or encourage craving in others? Does it drain your attention so much that you forget to live? Right livelihood is not about perfection. It is about awareness, about making choices that reduce harm and increase clarity. This might mean choosing a path that brings less money, but more peace. It might mean resisting the pressure to monetize every passion. It might mean working less and living more simply. These are not easy choices, but they are liberating because they allow you to return to what actually matters. Letting go of the productivity obsession also means reclaiming time, not just for rest, but for reflection, for silence, for presence with others. When you stop measuring your day by output, you begin to notice what was hidden, like the quality of your attention, the tone of your voice, the way your body feels while you work. You start to value breaks not as wasted time, but as vital moments of resetting your nervous system. You stop apologizing for being unavailable all the time. You stop glamorizing burnout. You begin to honor your energy the same way you honor your values, with intention. Right livelihood also invites humility. You stop trying to build a perfect career and start living a meaningful life. You stop needing titles and accolades to feel worthy. You begin to trust that enough can actually feel like enough. This shift impacts not only your own well-being, but the culture around you. Because when one person slows down and works from integrity, others feel it. When someone values rest, presence, and care over endless output, it offers permission, it changes the tone, it models a different kind of success. This success is measured differently. Not in promotions or profits, but in how many mornings you wake up with peace, in how often you can look back at your day and say, I stayed aligned, I was kind, I didn't betray myself for approval. These are the metrics of a meaningful path. Right livelihood also calls for discernment. Not everything that feels rewarding is wholesome. Not every opportunity leads to freedom. It takes courage to say no to what seems impressive but feels wrong. It takes maturity to walk away from what feeds the ego but weakens the soul. And it takes mindfulness to notice when productivity becomes compulsion. When you're working not because the task is needed, but because stillness feels unbearable. This awareness is subtle but powerful, because it lets you catch the moment the mind starts chasing again, and in that moment choose something different. This might look like stopping work when the task is done, even if others keep going. It might look like not answering messages during rest. It might look like building a schedule that leaves space instead of squeezing every second. These are small actions, but they reclaim your time, your attention, your sanity. You also begin to notice how much of your worth was tangled in doing. And as that knot loosens, you find a deeper form of confidence. The kind that does not need to be earned. The kind that comes from being in integrity, not being impressive. This confidence is quieter, but it is steadier, because it's not shaken by deadlines or opinions. It rests on the knowledge that you are living in a way that feels honest, that your work supports your path, not replaces it. And with that support, the mind becomes clearer, the body becomes softer, life becomes slower, not out of resistance, but because it finally feels safe to move at the pace of care. This care is not selfish. It is the ground for everything meaningful. When you are not rushing, you hear more, you connect more, you make fewer mistakes, you create with depth instead of quantity. Your presence becomes your offering, and that presence extends into everything. Conversations, meals, commutes, work, all become opportunities for mindfulness. All become part of the path. This is the wisdom of right livelihood, that your spiritual life and your work life are not separate. They meet in every choice, every hour, every breath. Letting go of the productivity obsession is not about doing less. It's about doing differently. It's about valuing the quality of your attention as much as the task itself. It's about remembering that you are not here to be efficient. You are here to be awake. And being awake does not require achievement. It requires alignment, care, honesty, rhythm. This rhythm is not one size fits all. It's something you feel for yourself. You learn when to push and when to pause, when to speak and when to step back, when to work and when to rest. And that knowing becomes your guide, not the pressure of culture, but the clarity of presence. With that clarity, life no longer feels like a race. Work no longer feels like a burden. You are not trying to win anything. You are simply living the path, step by step, choice by choice, with your integrity intact. And that is more than enough. When your work no longer defines your worth and your days are no longer shaped by the need to prove something, even the simplest acts begin to feel different. You start to notice how much of your life had been lived in automatic motion, how even moments meant for nourishment were often filled with distraction, speed, or guilt. As your pace softens and your relationship with effort transforms, daily routines become opportunities to return to presence. And among these, one of the most overlooked is eating. A practice so ordinary yet so intimate that to meet it with awareness is to touch the essence of mindfulness itself. The Buddha taught that eating can be a meditation, not through rigid technique, but through reflection, through presence, through honoring the act of receiving nourishment with full attention and gratitude. In many monastic traditions, before taking a meal, practitioners recite the 5 reflections. These are not rituals meant to add formality, but invitations to deepen the experience of eating beyond habit. They call the mind out of craving, out of mental chatter, and into connection with the body, the food, and the causes and conditions that made the meal possible. The first reflection reminds us to consider where the food comes from, not in vague terms, but with real contemplation. Every grain of rice, every drop of oil, every leaf and root has passed through many hands and many lives. Farmers, transporters, cooks, planets and seasons. This food is not separate from the world. It is the world. This reflection breaks the illusion of independence. It reminds us that every bite is a link in an interwoven chain of generosity and labor. The more this is seen, the harder it becomes to eat carelessly. The second reflection turns inward. It asks us to examine whether we are worthy of receiving this food, not as a form of self-judgment, but as an invitation to be sincere. Are we living with intention? Are we using our energy for wholesome purposes? Are we honoring the support we are receiving? This question doesn't demand perfection. It asks for honesty. It pulls us out of entitlement and into humility. And in that humility, the act of eating becomes sacred. The third reflection brings awareness to mental states. It encourages us to guard against greed. Even when food is simple, the mind can generate craving, more flavor, more quantity, a different texture, a better meal later. This reflection points out that hunger is not just physical. Often we eat to avoid discomfort, to fill silence, or to feel control. But when these habits go unseen, eating becomes a numbing behavior. This reflection interrupts that pattern. It asks us to meet the hunger with mindfulness, not to suppress it, but to see it clearly. The fourth reflection turns the attention to the purpose of eating. Food is medicine. It is not entertainment. It is not a reward. It is not an emotional escape. It is fuel to sustain life, support practice, and care for the body so that it can serve wisdom. This shift in orientation transforms the entire experience of meals. Instead of seeking satisfaction, we cultivate balance. Instead of indulgence, we meet function with reverence. The mind softens. Gratitude arises. Food becomes enough. The fifth reflection points to responsibility. It reminds us that this body, nourished by food, must be used in service of awareness. It must not be used for harm, not for distraction, not for unskillful actions. This body is a vessel of practice, and eating is not separate from that path. When we reflect in this way, we remember that mindfulness is not something we pick up after a meal. It is present during every part of life, including the act of chewing, swallowing, and digesting. Taken together, these reflections reshape the act of eating from a habit into a ritual of presence. Each one peels back a layer of unconsciousness. They bring the mind back to now, to the texture of the rice, the scent of the vegetables, the rhythm of the breath while eating. They remind us to slow down, not just in movement, but in thought. To taste, not just consume. To appreciate, not just finish. This kind of eating changes how we relate to food. We begin to see it not as pleasure or burden, but as relationship, a conversation between the earth, the body, and the mind. Meals stop being a break from awareness and become part of it. Hunger becomes less frightening. Fullness becomes less necessary, because the mind is present throughout. Slowing down while eating reveals how conditioned our habits are. We notice the urge to eat faster than needed, to reach for more before finishing what's on the plate, to fill silence with conversation, to watch something while eating so we don't feel too much. These habits are not wrong, but they are unconscious, and what is unconscious cannot be chosen. Awareness is what gives us back our choice. When you practice eating with the 5 reflections, you also begin to see how eating connects to ethics, not just in what you eat, but in how you eat it. Are you wasting food? Are you eating beyond what you need? Are you using food as escape? These questions don't require shame, they require attention, and with attention, action naturally becomes more aligned. This alignment brings peace, because eating, when done with awareness, becomes a reminder of interdependence. It becomes an act of gratitude. It becomes a space where nothing is rushed. Even a single raisin held with care can reveal the entire Dharma. The seed, the soil, the rain, the sun, the hands that picked it, the mind that receives it, the breath that anchors the moment. Even the body begins to respond. Digestion improves. Cravings decrease. The nervous system relaxes. Because when the mind is present, the body is not asked to rush. Eating slowly is not just psychological, it is physiological. It signals safety. It signals calm. It reinforces the state of rest that mindfulness supports. This practice does not require ideal conditions. You can begin with one breath before eating, one pause, one moment of noticing. Even a brief reflection can shift the tone of the meal, and that tone shapes the energy of what follows. When you eat with presence, your next action is more likely to be skillful, more likely to be thoughtful, because the momentum has changed. You begin to carry this energy beyond meals, into how you prepare food, into how you shop, into how you offer food to others. Eating no longer begins at the table. It begins when you choose what to eat. and it continues in how you care for your body after. This continuity turns eating into a living meditation, one that does not end. There is also joy in this simplicity, not the pleasure of indulgence, but the joy of contact, the joy of being with life exactly as it is, not needing more, not wishing for less, just here, with the breath, with the food, with the awareness that holds it all. This practice becomes even more powerful in community. When shared with others, mindful eating invites collective slowing. It invites silence. It invites gratitude that is not performed, but felt. You begin to notice how communal meals often become more about words than awareness. But in silence, something deeper can arise, a shared presence that nourishes more than the food itself. Even if others are not practicing, your awareness changes the field. Your slowness invites ease. Your presence creates a ripple, not through instruction, but through example. And that example becomes a form of generosity. In the end, the 5 reflections are not just about food. They are about life, about seeing clearly, about honoring process over pace, about choosing intention over habit. They remind us that even the most ordinary act, when met with presence, becomes sacred. You are not asked to be perfect, only to be awake, only to notice, to slow down not as performance, but as care, to eat not as escape, but as return. And in that return, the day begins again, not in the past, not in the future, but right here, with the sound of chewing, the softness of breath, the truth that this moment, simple and full, is enough. When eating becomes a practice of presence, something fundamental shifts. Life no longer rushes through unnoticed moments. The pace slows not just around the table, but through your whole being. What once felt ordinary, taking a bite, pausing before a meal, becomes a mirror, reflecting awareness itself. From this quiet ground, another doorway opens. Even more constant than food, even more intimate than taste, is the breath. And within it lies a path not only to calm, but to complete transformation. Not through belief, through rhythm, through repetition, through deep, deliberate attention. This is the practice of anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. Breathing happens whether or not we pay attention, but the moment awareness returns to it, the entire system begins to respond. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, energetically. The breath becomes a thread that links the seen and unseen, not as an object to control, but as a teacher. It offers a rhythm far older and more trustworthy than any mental narrative. In this way, breath is not just a calming tool, it is a training in living. When you begin to observe the breath, the first shift is often subtle. You notice that it has a texture, a length, a pace. You notice the gap between inhale and exhale. You notice the way the breath changes with mood. This noticing brings you back, not to a place, but to a pace, the natural rhythm of aliveness, stripped of effort. This rhythm has no urgency, no goal. The breath is not trying to be anything other than what it is, and in its simplicity, it teaches you how to be with life without forcing it forward. Over time, your nervous system learns to trust this, to soften around the need for control, to let the moment be led by awareness, not anxiety. In Anapanasati, this awareness deepens step by step. The Buddha offered a complete structure for this training, 16 contemplations unfolding gradually. It begins with simply knowing the breath, a short breath, a long breath. No judgment, no adjustment, just recognition. From there, the practice moves into feeling the whole body while breathing, calming the body with the breath, and later observing the mind itself. These stages are not stairs to climb, they are layers of attention. Each one stabilizes and softens the next. When you are present with breathing in the body, you begin to feel what tension is held and where. You sense how breath changes in response to thought. You feel how emotion appears and fades without needing to be acted upon. Breathing doesn't just calm the body, it shows the mind to itself. This showing is essential because so much of mental busyness is fed by unexamined reactivity. Thoughts chase each other, emotions rise and fall, and the more scattered the breath becomes, the more fragmented awareness feels. But when attention holds the breath consistently, those scattered energies begin to settle, not because you suppress them, but because you are no longer pulled by them. Breath anchors you in what is real, not in theory, but in felt sense. It gives you something immediate to return to, and in that return, again and again, the pace of your entire life begins to recalibrate. You no longer feel the need to rush from moment to moment, because the breath does not rush. It knows how to stay. Staying is not passive. It requires presence, especially when the mind wanders, which it will. The practice is not in never drifting. It is in always returning, with gentleness, with humility. Each return is a strengthening, not of control, but of contact. You begin to trust the breath more than the thought, more than the mood, more than the pull of distraction. As the breath deepens, so does the space between thoughts, not as a void, but as awareness itself, spacious, steady, and alive. You begin to feel that your thoughts are no longer stacked, one upon another, but drifting like clouds through a vast sky. That vastness is not outside of you. It is you when the breath is fully known. This knowing is not intellectual. It is experiential. The breath is never in the past. It is never in the future. It is always now. And so, through it, you are trained in the now, not in the idea of presence, but in the embodiment of it. Each inhale, a return. Each exhale, a release. This rhythm teaches more than books ever could. With time, Anapanasati begins to touch not only calmness, but insight. Because when you follow the breath into the subtle layers of the mind, you start to see how clinging forms. You see how craving arises, how aversion stiffens the breath, how fear narrows it. These aren't concepts, they are felt in the body. The breath shows you directly what the mind is doing, and in that seeing, something loosens. The compulsion to fix every thought softens. The need to complete every plan loses its urgency. The mind learns to sit with what arises without needing to manipulate it. Breath becomes the training ground for equanimity, not through force, but through rhythm. This rhythm is never mechanical. It's alive. It reflects the quality of each moment. You begin to sense how the breath responds to spaciousness, to joy, to resistance. You learn to listen to it, to follow its lead, not to dominate it, but to partner with it. This partnership is what allows transformation to occur. Because true transformation is not sudden, it's rhythmic. It repeats, it returns, it deepens slowly with consistency, just like breath. And the more you live from that rhythm, the more you begin to see how much of your busyness was learned, conditioned, assumed. The breath unmasks it and shows you that peace was never far. It was just buried beneath distraction. Even in moments of chaos, the breath is there. In a difficult conversation, in the middle of noise, in the space between tasks. You do not need silence to be mindful. You only need willingness to return. And that willingness is strengthened every time you follow the breath with care. As the breath becomes more familiar, it becomes less separate from the rest of life. You find its rhythm in walking, in writing, in resting, in speaking. The awareness cultivated through anapanasati becomes embodied, not something you access only on the cushion, but something you carry into every room, every situation, every breath. And in carrying it, you begin to meet others differently, with more patience, with more stillness behind your words, with a kind of grounded presence that doesn't demand attention but naturally draws respect. People feel it, because breath awareness changes not just how you relate to yourself, but how you relate to the world. You begin to see how much of modern life is designed to fragment this awareness, to speed up your rhythms, to draw your attention outward. But once you've trained with the breath, you are not as easily pulled. You can return to yourself, not in theory, but in rhythm, quietly, repeatedly. And in that return, the pace of your entire life changes. Not dramatically, not overnight, but deeply. Each breath becomes a step toward remembering what matters, not in thought, but in presence, in the steady unfolding of attention through time. This is the gift of anapanasati. It asks for nothing but consistency, and in return, it gives you access to your own depth, not as an idea, but as experience, as rhythm, as presence, as breath. As the breath becomes the teacher, it leads you back to what is always present. You begin to move from distraction to stillness, not through force, but through rhythm. The more you stay with the breath, the less interested you become in the mental noise that used to drive your actions. You no longer react from pressure, you respond from awareness. With each inhale and exhale, the idea of a fixed self, the one who's always doing, proving, becoming, starts to soften. And from that softening, a deeper inquiry naturally arises. If I am not the thoughts, not the breath, not even the patterns I once defended, then what am I made of? The next step is not to define, but to dissolve, to return attention to the body, not as identity, but as elements. This is the foundation of Dhatu contemplation. In the teachings of the Buddha, contemplating the elements is not mystical. It is grounded in direct experience. Earth, water, fire, air, and space are not symbolic. They are physical, observable, immediate. They are not hidden. They are what the body is. To meditate on them is not to fantasize. It is to strip away illusion, especially the illusion that this body, this form, belongs to an I that is fixed or separate. The practice begins by observing solidity. Earth element is what gives form its shape. Bones, skin, nails, teeth, these are the hard aspects of the body. When you sit quietly and feel the weight of your body pressing into the cushion or chair, you are not simply relaxing. You are meeting the earth element directly. You are touching the part of the body that is not personal. That does not belong to you, but follows physical law. This contemplation erodes attachment by revealing what was always true, that the body is composed of the same materials as the world around it. Next, attention turns to the water element. Fluids within the body, saliva, sweat, blood, lymph, tears. These too do not answer to the ego. They move with their own intelligence, responding to temperature, mood, and biology. When you observe water in the body, you are not meditating on an abstract concept. You are directly experiencing impermanence. Fluid flows. It gathers and disperses. You begin to see how much of what you thought was you is in fact a process that cannot be held. Then comes the fire element, the heat that digests food, regulates temperature, fuels energy. Fire is felt in the warmth of the hands, in the flush of emotion, in the metabolism of every cell. To contemplate fire is to recognize that transformation is always happening. What you ate yesterday becomes your cells today. The warmth that comforts you now may be gone in an hour. Fire teaches change without apology. It does not ask for permission. It moves, and it does so without needing to consult a self. Following fire is air. Movement, motion, vibration. In the body, this is most easily felt as breath, as pulse, as the fine stirring of sensation. Air does not stay still. It circulates, it enters and exits. In observing it, you notice that even stillness is full of motion. There is no part of the body untouched by this subtle flow. And again, it is not yours. It is simply occurring, part of nature, repeating a pattern older than thought. Finally, space. The most elusive element, but perhaps the most profound. Space is what allows the other elements to exist. It is the silence that holds sound, the openness that allows form. In the body, space is found in the cavities, the mouth, the lungs, the abdomen. But it is also found between thoughts, between breaths, in the pause that allows awareness to expand. Space is not something you make. It is already here, and recognizing it dissolves the need to hold on, because space cannot be owned. As you move through these contemplations, something begins to unravel. The sense of me as the owner of this body becomes less convincing. You no longer feel like the central figure around whom experience revolves. Instead, you begin to feel like part of a system, a collection of elements interacting, changing, returning to what they came from. This does not lead to detachment in the cold sense. It leads to freedom, because the ego's urgency is often a reaction to threat, the need to prove, the fear of loss, the craving for recognition. All of these are built on the belief in a solid self that must be protected. But when the self is seen as a changing configuration of elements, the fear begins to dissolve. This dissolution is not annihilation, it is clarity. You see that pain still arises, joy still moves through, thought continues. But none of it needs to be owned. You begin to relate to experience with less tension. You allow emotions without collapsing into them. You experience sensations without needing to fix or fight them. You rest more easily in change. The practice also brings humility, because you see how fragile and temporary this form is. Not in a dramatic way, but in a truthful way. Every breath is borrowed. Every cell is aging. The elements that form you today will not remain in this configuration forever. Knowing this brings tenderness. You stop taking your life so personally. You begin to respect the time you have, not by filling it with achievement, but by meeting it with sincerity. There is also compassion here. As you see your own body as elements, you begin to see others the same way, not as characters in your story, but as forms shaped by the same earth, moved by the same air, warmed by the same fire. The boundaries between self and other soften. You stop needing to prove anything to anyone. You stop holding grudges so tightly, because how can one configuration of elements hate another? And from this view, the pace of life naturally slows. Not because you're trying to be mindful, but because the urgency to defend, acquire, and control is no longer convincing. The mind becomes less reactive. Speech becomes less impulsive. Choices become more aligned with truth rather than habit. Even suffering begins to shift, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer seen as my pain. It is simply sensation arising in the field of experience. Earth contracting, fire intensifying, air constricting, water overflowing. You begin to meet these experiences not with panic, but with wisdom. This wisdom is not distant. It is embodied. It is felt directly as the absence of struggle, as the return to rhythm, as the knowing that what you are is not the story, not the body, not the voice in your head, but the awareness in which all of this arises and passes. And that awareness needs no urgency, because it is not bound by the same illusions. It does not chase. It does not defend. It simply holds. As you continue to reflect on the elements, the false center begins to dissolve more fully, and with it, the need to always be doing, always becoming, always fixing. What remains is presence, not floating above life, but grounded in it. Steady, spacious, sincere. This is not an escape from the world. It is a clearer way of living in it, because when the ego no longer drives everything, you become more available, more kind, more stable, less shaken by change, less caught by craving, less pulled into conflict. And in this space, something deeper is allowed to grow, not a new identity, but a way of being that needs no name, a presence that responds, not from fear, but from truth. And that truth is simple. This body is not mine. These thoughts are not mine. This life is not about me. It is about awareness, moving through form, about elements, meeting elements, about a rhythm older than self, reminding us that peace is not created, it is uncovered. And once uncovered, it changes everything. Not loudly, but quietly, deeply, fully. So now you've arrived. Not at the end of a lesson, but at the beginning of a new rhythm. One where the rush no longer defines you. One where presence becomes more valuable than productivity, and stillness is no longer mistaken for idleness, but honored as wisdom. You've walked through the forests of awareness, breathed with intention, eaten with reverence, and seen yourself not as a machine of doing, but as a field of being. You've learned that slowness is not weakness, but power. That time is not your enemy, but a reflection of your mind. That letting go is not loss, but freedom. Each teaching, each pause, each breath has pointed you home. not to a distant place, but to this moment, the only one that ever mattered. And now, as you drift into sleep, let these truths settle deeper than thought. Let your breath carry them gently through the night. Let your body rest in the safety of now. Because the path to peace has never been far, it begins with the choice to slow down, and you've already taken the first step. If these teachings stirred something in you, share it in the comments. What part spoke to you most? What will you take with you tomorrow? We'd love to hear how your rhythm is changing. And if you want more wisdom like this, more gentle reminders to come back to yourself, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell. We're walking this path together, one quiet breath at a time. Until next time, may your sleep be deep, your heart be light, and your steps steady with presence. Good night.